What if I told you that one decision made in the frozen steppes of ancient Europe would reshape the entire course of Western civilization? Deep in the windswept plains where modern Ukraine stretches today, a confederation of warriors was about to face a choice that would echo through eternity. This isn't just another forgotten chapter of history. This is the moment when the Ostrogoths were born from fire, blood, and impossible odds. Journey back to the 3rd century AD, when the endless grasslands of the Pontic steppes hummed with activity. Here, along the life-giving waters of the Dnieper River, a remarkable Germanic alliance was taking shape. The Grutungi had claimed these fertile territories as their domain, establishing themselves across the nutrient-rich black soil that would nourish both their expanding population and their increasingly powerful warrior elite. These Gothic peoples shared ancestral bonds with their Western relatives, the Tervingi. Yet they carved out a completely different destiny. The eastern landscape molded their character, while constant interaction with steppe nomads shaped their worldview. Unlike the Tervingi, who would eventually become known as Visigoths, and concentrated their strength in forested regions between the Prut and Danube rivers, the Grutungi commanded vast territories stretching eastward toward the Don River. This geographic positioning proved absolutely critical. The Grutungi found themselves controlling major trade arteries linking the Black Sea with Europe's interior, making them wealthy beyond imagination. However, this prime location also meant constant exposure to nomadic influences that had dominated these plains for centuries. Every sunrise brought new challenges, new opportunities, and new threats from the horizon. Archaeological discoveries from sites like Cherniakiv paint a vivid portrait of sophisticated urban planning. The Grutungi didn't simply camp in temporary settlements. They built permanent communities showcasing remarkable organizational skills. Massive timber-framed houses, some reaching 20 meters in length, stood in carefully planned neighborhoods housing hundreds of residents. These weren't crude barbarian hovels, but sophisticated structures featuring stone hearths, dedicated storage spaces, and specialized workshops where master craftsmen created metalwork that would become legendary. The presence of distinct craft districts within these towns reveals social complexity far exceeding basic tribal organization. This was a society with clear hierarchies, specialized professions, and economic systems that rivaled contemporary Roman cities. The Grutungi had evolved from simple warriors into sophisticated urban planners and administrators. Nothing embodied Grutungi culture more powerfully than their relationship with warfare and honor. Elite burial sites from this era contain weapon collections that would make modern museums weep with envy. Long iron swords bearing distinctive ring pommels, broad-bladed spears capable of piercing any armor, and shield bosses decorated with geometric patterns that told stories of their owners' achievements. These weren't merely tools of war, they were sacred symbols representing status, identity, and family honor. The craftsmanship displayed in these weapons matched or exceeded contemporary Roman military equipment. The silver and gold inlays demonstrated both the owner's wealth and the metal worker's incredible skill. Gothic smiths had either mastered advanced techniques through Roman contact or developed revolutionary methods independently. Either way, their creations became objects of desire across the known world. Women's graves reveal equally stunning displays of wealth and artistic achievement. Elaborate fibula, ornate neck rings, and decorative belt fittings crafted from precious metals and studded with garnets, amber, and exotic gemstones showcased not only female status within Gothic society, but also the Confederation's extensive trading networks. Baltic amber, Indian garnets, and Chinese silk appeared in Gothic burial chambers, proving their integration into continental and transcontinental commerce systems. During this transformative period, Gothic artists developed distinctive styles reflecting both indigenous traditions and external influences absorbed through cultural exchange. Gothic metalworkers perfected the cloisonné technique, creating polychrome jewelry using thin gold cells to hold precisely cut gemstones in breathtaking patterns. This innovation would later influence artistic traditions throughout medieval Europe, representing a brilliant fusion of Germanic craftsmanship with decorative elements borrowed from steppe nomads and Mediterranean civilizations. Initial encounters between the Grutungi and Rome occurred through various channels, creating the complex relationship that would define Gothic-Roman interactions for generations. Trade formed the foundation of early connections, with Gothic merchants exchanging furs, amber, captured slaves, and agricultural surplus for Roman manufactured goods, wine, and luxury items. Roman coins discovered in Gothic archaeological sites demonstrate this commercial relationship's scope, while Roman glassware, bronze vessels, and pottery found in elite Gothic burials indicate that Roman products had become essential status symbols. Diplomatic relations evolved alongside commercial exchanges as Roman authorities recognized the necessity of managing relationships with powerful barbarian confederations along their extended frontiers. The Grutungi, like other Gothic groups, presented both opportunities and challenges for Roman frontier policy. Their military prowess made them valuable potential allies, yet their territorial ambitions and warrior traditions posed constant threats to imperial security. Roman diplomats worked tirelessly to maintain delicate equilibrium, offering subsidies, official recognition, and military cooperation agreements to Gothic leaders willing to serve imperial interests. Border skirmishes along the Danube frontier interrupted these generally peaceful interactions as Gothic raiding parties tested Roman defences while seeking plunder and territorial expansion opportunities. These conflicts, though often limited in scope, provided Gothic warriors with invaluable combat experience while exposing them to Roman military tactics and equipment. The raids also fulfilled crucial social functions within Gothic society, allowing young warriors to prove themselves while ambitious leaders built followings through successful military ventures. Roman responses to Gothic pressure varied depending on imperial circumstances and frontier commander personalities. Some officials pursued aggressive military campaigns designed to punish Gothic raiders and demonstrate Roman strength. Others preferred diplomatic solutions, using subsidies and alliance agreements to redirect Gothic military energy toward threats against imperial interests. These varying approaches created intricate patterns of conflict and cooperation that shaped Gothic political development and military capabilities. The arrival of Hunnic peoples in the Pontic steppes during the 4th century's latter half fundamentally transformed the political landscape that had nurtured Grutungi prosperity. The Huns, wielding superior cavalry tactics and ruthless military efficiency, posed existential threats to established Gothic power structures. Unlike previous steppe nomads who had generally been absorbed into existing arrangements or established tributary relationships with Gothic confederations, the Huns demanded complete regional domination. This moment of crisis would forge the Ostrogothic identity from the crucible of impossible choices and unimaginable pressure. The birth of true Ostrogothic identity didn't happen overnight. It was forged in the crucible of cultural collision and political survival. As Hunnic dominance reshaped the eastern steppes, something extraordinary began emerging from what seemed like complete defeat. The Gothic peoples found themselves caught between annihilation and adaptation, and their choice would create an entirely new civilization. This nascent Ostrogothic character blended ancient Gothic traditions with revolutionary military concepts imposed by their Hunnic overlords. The legendary warrior spirit that had always defined Gothic society evolved into something far more sophisticated. Gothic military commanders discovered how to function within Hunnic hierarchies, while secretly preserving their ancestral customs and burning political ambitions. What resulted was a fascinating hybrid culture, distinctly Gothic at its core, yet infused with steppe military innovations and administrative concepts that would later prove essential for Ostrogothic triumph. The material artifacts from this transformative era tell an incredible story of cultural negotiation and strategic adaptation. Archaeological discoveries reveal continued production of traditional Gothic crafts, existing alongside newly adopted Hunnic-style weaponry and equestrian equipment. Gothic artisans demonstrated remarkable flexibility, mastering techniques for creating composite bows, scale armor, and specialized cavalry gear associated with steppe warfare, while simultaneously maintaining their legendary expertise in metalworking and decorative arts. This technological fusion established the material foundation for military effectiveness that would later define Ostrogothic armies. Social hierarchies that developed during this transitional period represented a brilliant synthesis of Gothic aristocratic heritage with revolutionary organizational methods. Learned through service in Hunnic forces, Gothic nobles who successfully survived the challenges of Hunnic rule often emerged with dramatically enhanced military capabilities and expanded political perspectives that would serve them magnificently in future independent campaigns. The invaluable experience of operating within multi-ethnic military confederations under Hunnic leadership provided crucial lessons in managing diverse populations and coordinating massive, complex military operations. The catastrophic destruction of the Grutungi Confederation in 375 AD stands as one of early medieval Europe's most pivotal moments. The Hunnic assault, commanded by a mysterious ruler whom some chronicles identify as Balamber, struck with the devastating precision that would become synonymous with steppe warfare excellence. This wasn't a single overwhelming attack, but rather a methodically coordinated campaign that systematically demolished the political and military foundations sustaining Gothic dominance across the Pontic steppes for over a century. The Hunnic war machine that engulfed the Grutungi represented a completely revolutionary warfare approach that caught the Goths utterly unprepared. While Germanic military doctrine emphasized infantry-heavy formations, the Huns deployed massed cavalry units equipped with powerful composite bows capable of accurate targeting at distances exceeding 300 meters. These warriors, mounted on hardy steppe ponies bred specifically for endurance and velocity, could strike with lightning speed and vanish before their enemies could mount effective responses. The psychological devastation proved equally destructive as the physical carnage they unleashed. Gothic fighters accustomed to close-quarters combat found themselves helplessly unable to engage an enemy that materialized like phantoms and disappeared like morning mist. King Ermanaric of the Grutungi, whose reign had symbolized the absolute pinnacle of Eastern Gothic power, watched his confederation disintegrate under relentless Hunnic pressure. Archaeological evidence from excavation sites throughout the Dnieper Basin reveals unmistakable signs of violent destruction during this period, with burned settlements and hastily concealed treasure hoards marking the devastating path of Hunnic conquest. The rapidity of Gothic collapse suggests that the Huns had identified and ruthlessly exploited critical vulnerabilities in Gothic military organization, possibly through intelligence gathered during previous diplomatic encounters, or through defections from Gothic subject peoples who recognized opportunity in the rapidly changing political landscape. The subjugation process following initial military victories demonstrated the sophisticated political strategies underlying Hunnic success. Rather than completely destroying Gothic society, the Huns implemented a carefully controlled domination system that preserved existing social structures while ensuring absolute political submission. Gothic aristocrats who surrendered were permitted to maintain their positions and substantial portions of their wealth, but only as subordinates within a vastly expanded Hunnic imperial framework. This approach proved remarkably effective in maintaining regional stability, while extracting maximum military and economic benefits from conquered populations. Integration of Ostrogothic warriors into Hunnic military forces commenced almost immediately following conquest. The Huns recognized the exceptional combat effectiveness of Gothic heavy infantry and cavalry, viewing them as invaluable assets rather than merely defeated adversaries. Gothic soldiers contributed expertise in siege warfare, advanced metalworking, and organized battlefield tactics that perfectly complemented Hunnic mobility and archery supremacy. This military synthesis produced combined forces far more formidable than either group could have deployed independently. Gothic military culture underwent fundamental transformation under Hunnic influence, involving dramatic changes in equipment, tactical approaches, and organizational principles. Gothic warriors mastered composite bow usage, a technology requiring years of dedicated training to achieve effective proficiency. Constructing these weapons involved laminating horn, sinew, and specially selected wood in precise configurations capable of generating tremendous power while remaining compact enough for mounted combat. Gothic craftsmen adapted their metalworking expertise to produce specialized arrowheads, thumb rings, and archery equipment essential for steppe warfare mastery. Mounted combat gradually assumed increasing importance in Gothic military practice, though this transition occurred unevenly across different social strata. Elite Gothic warriors had always maintained horses for transportation and prestige display, but systematic cavalry usage and coordinated battlefield roles represented significant tactical evolution. The Huns provided comprehensive instruction in horse breeding techniques, training methods, and mounted combat formations that completely transformed Gothic military capabilities. Archaeological discoveries show dramatically increasing numbers of horse burials and riding equipment in Gothic graves from this era, indicating the growing significance of equestrian skills in Gothic warrior culture. Political structures emerging during Hunnic domination reflected complex blending of Gothic aristocratic traditions with steppe imperial administrative concepts. Gothic nobles found themselves operating within hierarchical systems, extending far beyond traditional tribal boundaries, encompassing dozens of different ethnic groups under unified Hunnic command. This exposure to imperial-scale political organization provided invaluable experience that would later profoundly influence Ostrogothic state-building efforts. Intermarriage between Gothic and Hunnic elites became a crucial mechanism for political integration and cultural exchange. These unions, often arranged for diplomatic purposes, created extensive kinship networks transcending ethnic boundaries and facilitating unprecedented cooperation between different groups within the Hunnic Confederation. Children from these marriages grew up completely bilingual and bicultural, serving as natural intermediaries between Gothic and Hunnic communities. Archaeological evidence suggests these mixed families maintained distinctive burial practices, combining elements from both cultural traditions. Adoption of steppe administrative practices by Gothic leaders involved mastering innovative methods of taxation, military recruitment, and territorial organization. The Huns maintained remarkably sophisticated systems for extracting tribute from subject peoples, while managing complex logistics of maintaining enormous mobile armies. Gothic administrators proving capable in these roles often found themselves governing territories and populations far from their ancestral homelands, gaining invaluable experience in ruling diverse ethnic groups with completely different cultural practices and economic systems. This period of seeming subjugation was actually preparing the Ostrogoths for greatness beyond imagination. The transformation of Ostrogothic culture during this revolutionary period reached far beyond military and political boundaries, penetrating deep into religious beliefs and artistic expression. Gothic craftsmen began weaving Hunnic decorative elements into their metalwork, birthing hybrid artistic movements that mirrored their evolving cultural landscape. The renowned polychrome jewelry tradition, that would later become the hallmark of Ostrogothic material excellence, emerged during these turbulent years through an extraordinary fusion of Germanic cloisonné mastery with steppe preferences for dynamic animal imagery and flowing compositions. As integration within the Hunnic Confederation deepened, Ostrogothic military forces assumed increasingly vital roles in major campaigns. By the early 5th century, Gothic contingents comprised substantial portions of Hunnic armies, delivering heavy infantry support and siege expertise that perfectly complemented Hunnic cavalry dominance. These forces marched across an immense geographical canvas, from the towering Caucasus peaks to the Rhine frontier territories, accumulating military knowledge and cultural exposure that would prove absolutely essential for later independent operations. The momentous invasion of Gaul in 451 AD marked the absolute zenith of Hunnic military might and witnessed the largest deployment of Ostrogothic forces under foreign command. Attila's decision to launch this colossal campaign reflected both mounting internal pressures within the Hunnic Confederation and strategic opportunities created by Roman political chaos. The massive army that thundered across the Rhine included formidable Ostrogothic contingents commanded by their own nobles, who had spent entire decades mastering coordination between their tactics and Hunnic cavalry alongside countless allied forces. The Ostrogothic warriors who advanced into Gaul bore virtually no resemblance to their ancestors who had confronted the initial Hunnic conquest generations earlier. Continuous military service had transformed them into elite professional soldiers capable of excelling in remarkably diverse tactical scenarios. Their equipment represented a stunning combination of traditional Gothic weapons and armor, enhanced with steppe innovations, creating distinctive military assemblages that reflected their extraordinary cultural position within the Hunnic Confederation. Scale armor, composite bows, and curved sabers appeared seamlessly integrated with traditional Germanic spears, shields, and legendary long swords. The epic Battle of the Catalaunian Plains exposed both the tremendous strengths and critical limitations of the Hunnic military system that had dominated European warfare for nearly 8 decades. This massive engagement pitting Attila's forces against a combined Roman-Visigothic coalition under Aetius revealed the tactical sophistication Hunnic armies had achieved through decades of coordinated operations. Ostrogothic contingents fought magnificently alongside Hunnic cavalry, Gepid infantry, and warriors from dozens of other subject peoples in a brilliantly coordinated battle strategy that came tantalizingly close to achieving complete victory, despite facing absolutely determined opposition. Attila's sudden death in 453 AD triggered an immediate succession crisis that brutally exposed the fundamental instability lurking beneath Hunnic imperial grandeur. The great conqueror's sons possessed neither their father's fearsome military reputation nor his masterful political intelligence, while various subject peoples who had served under Hunnic domination began rapidly reassessing their positions within the Confederation. The Ostrogoths, who had meticulously maintained their distinct identity and military organization throughout the entire period of subjugation, discovered themselves uniquely positioned to exploit the rapidly expanding power vacuum. The rebellion that climaxed in the decisive Battle of Nedao in 454 AD represented a carefully coordinated effort by multiple subject peoples to shatter Hunnic control forever. The Ostrogoths, led by surviving members of the prestigious Amal dynasty, who had painstakingly preserved their legitimacy throughout foreign rule, played the crucial role in organizing the anti-Hunnic coalition. Their military expertise, accumulated through decades of service in Hunnic armies, proved absolutely instrumental in developing innovative tactics capable of effectively countering traditional steppe warfare methods. The battle itself unfolded along the Nedao River, possibly the modern Netava in contemporary Hungary, where the rebel coalition achieved a crushing victory that definitively terminated Hunnic dominance across Central Europe. Ostrogothic heavy cavalry, supported by Gepid forces and other allied contingents, successfully shattered Hunnic formations that had been disrupted by coordinated archery barrages. The tactical innovations developed during their subjugation period allowed the Ostrogoths to brilliantly turn Hunnic military methods against their former overlords. The triumph at Nedao liberated not only the Ostrogoths but dozens of other peoples who had been absorbed into the Hunnic Confederation. The spectacular collapse of Hunnic power created unprecedented opportunities for territorial expansion and political reorganization that would completely reshape the ethnic composition of Central and Eastern Europe. For the Ostrogoths specifically, independence meant the golden chance to establish their own kingdom while retaining the invaluable military and administrative capabilities they had developed during 8 decades of foreign domination. The aftermath of Nedao created a massive power vacuum across the Pannonian Plains that ambitious Gothic leaders eagerly rushed to fill. Among the Amal nobles who had successfully preserved their royal bloodline through decades of Hunnic rule, none possessed greater potential than the infant born around 454 AD to King Theodemir. This child, named Theodoric after his illustrious grandfather, entered a world where Gothic independence had been violently reclaimed, but remained precariously balanced between resurgent tribal ambitions and the ever-present threat of Roman intervention. Theodemir's position within the fractured post-Hunnic landscape demanded careful navigation between multiple competing interests. The Ostrogothic Confederation that emerged from Nedao controlled extensive territories stretching across modern Hungary and significant portions of Serbia, yet their authority faced constant challenges from rival Gothic claimants, aggressive neighbours like the Gepids, and the complex diplomatic machinations of both Eastern and Western Roman courts. The elder Theodemir had established his credentials through exceptional military leadership during the liberation struggle, but maintaining power required completely different skills than those necessary for successful rebellion. The Ostrogothic settlements that developed during Theodoric's early childhood reflected the harsh military realities of their precarious independence. Archaeological evidence from sites like Apida reveals heavily fortified compounds, where Gothic nobles maintained armed retinues ready for immediate deployment. These installations cleverly combined traditional Germanic longhouses with defensive features learned during the Hunnic period, including sophisticated earthwork fortifications and strategically positioned horse corrals that could support rapid cavalry deployment. The material culture discovered in these sites demonstrates the continued fusion of Gothic and steppe traditions, featuring elaborate metalwork incorporating both Germanic animal motifs and the geometric patterns favoured by nomadic craftsmen. Young Theodoric's education during his earliest years occurred within this militarized environment, where survival skills included not only traditional aristocratic accomplishments, but also the complex diplomatic awareness required to navigate relationships with multiple Roman courts. Gothic nobles who had served in Hunnic administration brought sophisticated understanding of imperial politics to bear on their children's upbringing. Recognizing that future success would depend equally on political wisdom and military prowess, the boy learned to speak Gothic, Latin, and probably Greek from earliest childhood, while absorbing the intricate protocols governing interactions between barbarian kings and Roman officials. The momentous decision to send 7-year-old Theodoric to Constantinople as a diplomatic hostage around 461 AD represented a calculated gamble by his father Theodemir. The arrangement negotiated with Emperor Leo I provided crucial security guarantees for Ostrogothic territories in exchange for the young prince's residence at the imperial court. Such hostage arrangements had become standard diplomatic practice, allowing both sides to demonstrate good faith while providing Romans with leverage over barbarian behavior. For Theodoric personally, this arrangement offered unprecedented access to the highest levels of Roman political and military culture. The Constantinople that welcomed young Theodoric was arguably the most sophisticated metropolis in the contemporary world, a bustling city of perhaps 400,000 inhabitants, where classical Roman culture remnants blended seamlessly with Christian theology and the practical demands of governing a vast, multi-ethnic empire. The magnificent palace complex where Theodoric established residence covered several acres of prime real estate overlooking the breathtaking Bosphorus. Its marble halls and intricate mosaic decorations represented the absolute pinnacle of late antique artistic achievement. The stark contrast with the timber and earthwork compounds of Pannonia must have been utterly overwhelming for a child accustomed to frontier conditions. Imperial court life exposed Theodoric to levels of ceremonial complexity and administrative sophistication that far exceeded anything available in barbarian kingdoms. The elaborate protocols governing imperial audiences, intricate hierarchies of court officials, and sophisticated legal procedures regulating everything from property disputes to military recruitment provided invaluable practical lessons in statecraft that no Gothic noble could have acquired in their homeland. This education would soon transform a barbarian prince into history's greatest Germanic ruler. Daily encounters with senators, military commanders, and high-ranking clergy provided the young hostage with profound insights into the personalities and motivations driving imperial policy decisions. The specialized educational curriculum designed for aristocratic hostages included rigorous study of classical literature, advanced rhetoric, and comprehensive military science. Theodoric achieved complete fluency in written and spoken Latin, immersing himself in masterworks by Caesar, Livy, and Vegetius that delivered both historical wisdom and practical guidance for military command. His rhetorical education, grounded in the legendary works of Cicero and Quintilian, equipped him with the ability to construct compelling arguments and deliver persuasive speeches, capabilities that would prove absolutely invaluable during later diplomatic negotiations. Mathematical and geographical studies provided essential technical knowledge necessary for organizing massive military campaigns and managing intricate territorial administrations that would define his future reign. Military instruction within the imperial system exposed the young prince to tactical concepts and organizational methodologies, representing centuries of Roman military evolution. The Gothic youth mastered coordination of infantry and cavalry formations in sophisticated battlefield maneuvers, learned to organize siege operations utilizing advanced engineering techniques, and absorbed the logistical systems sustaining armies operating hundreds of miles from their supply bases. Regular training exercises with elite palace guard units provided hands-on experience commanding disciplined troops trained in proven Roman methods, while theoretical studies encompassed everything from fortification design to naval warfare strategies. The deeply religious environment of the imperial court presented Theodoric with his first sustained exposure to Nicene Christianity. Although his family's Arian convictions remained unshaken, the theological debates dominating contemporary intellectual discourse provided crucial insights into doctrinal divisions, complicating imperial politics. The magnificent liturgical ceremonies within Hagia Sophia demonstrated the immense power of religious symbolism in maintaining imperial authority, teaching Theodoric to navigate religious differences diplomatically while preserving his own theological beliefs. Social interactions with fellow hostages and young Roman aristocrats created extensive networks that would profoundly influence Theodoric's later career trajectory. The imperial court attracted ambitious young men from across the empire and beyond, including Persians, Armenians, and representatives of various barbarian peoples who had negotiated similar arrangements with Constantinople. These relationships provided intelligence about political developments across vast geographical ranges, while establishing potential diplomatic channels for future utilization. The friendships and rivalries forged during these formative years would resurface decades later in the complex negotiations characterizing late 5th century politics. Theodoric's return to Pannonia around 471 AD marked his dramatic transformation from diplomatic hostage to active participant in Ostrogothic politics. The 20-year-old prince brought with him not only exceptional military and administrative skills acquired through imperial education, but also sophisticated understanding of Roman strengths and vulnerabilities that would prove decisive in subsequent campaigns. His father Theodemir had successfully maintained Ostrogothic independence during his son's decade-long absence, yet the Confederation faced mounting pressures from multiple directions requiring innovative approaches to survive and flourish. The political landscape confronting Theodoric upon his homecoming had grown increasingly complex during his extended absence. The Ostrogothic Confederation competed fiercely for territory and influence with the Gepids under their formidable king Ardaric, while Suevi and Rugian tribes controlled strategic positions along the crucial Danube frontier. Meanwhile, rival Gothic groups under leaders like Theodoric Strabo had established independent power bases, directly challenging Yamal claims to supremacy over all Gothic peoples. These rivalries created golden opportunities for Roman manipulation as imperial diplomats skillfully played different barbarian factions against each other to prevent any single group from becoming dangerously powerful. Theodoric's initial military commands brilliantly demonstrated his ability to apply Roman tactical methods to traditional Gothic military heritage. The revolutionary combined arms formations he developed seamlessly integrated traditional Gothic heavy infantry with cavalry units trained in steppe warfare techniques learned during the Hunnic period. His forces employed sophisticated Roman siege equipment and engineering methods, while maintaining the aggressive warrior culture that motivated Gothic soldiers. These innovations proved particularly devastating against opponents who expected either purely Roman or purely barbarian tactics. The consolidation of Amal power under Theodoric's dynamic leadership required delicate balance between decisive military action and skillful diplomatic maneuvering. His campaigns against rival Gothic factions demonstrated superior tactical abilities, while his negotiations with Roman officials revealed sophisticated understanding of imperial politics. The subsidies and official recognition he secured from Constantinople provided essential resources for military expansion, while legitimizing Amal claims to leadership over all Ostrogothic peoples. Archaeological evidence from this transformative period shows increasing standardization of military equipment and burial practices across territories under Amal control, suggesting remarkably successful efforts to create unified cultural and political identity. The evolving relationship between Theodoric and Emperor Zeno developed into one of the most complex diplomatic partnerships of the late 5th century. Both leaders recognized their mutual dependence, while remaining acutely aware of potential conflict between their respective ambitions. Zeno desperately needed Gothic military support to counter threats from usurpers and rival barbarian groups, while Theodoric required imperial recognition and subsidies to maintain his position among competing Gothic factions. Their correspondence, preserved in fragmentary form by contemporary chroniclers, reveals sophisticated diplomatic language that masked underlying tensions while facilitating practical cooperation on multiple fronts. The Thracian campaigns of the 470s and 480s showcase Theodoric's remarkable ability to operate effectively within imperial strategic frameworks while pursuing distinctly Gothic objectives. His forces served as invaluable imperial allies against various threats to Constantinople's Balkan territories, demonstrating tactical flexibility and operational effectiveness that genuinely impressed Roman observers. These campaigns provided invaluable experience coordinating with imperial armies while offering opportunities to recruit additional Gothic warriors and acquire portable wealth through systematic plundering of enemy territories. The intricate maneuvering characterizing Theodoric's relationship with Theodoric Strabo illustrated the sophisticated political calculations required for success in late 5th century barbarian politics. The two Gothic leaders, both named after the same legendary royal ancestor, represented competing visions of Gothic identity and political organization. Strabo's faction emphasized accommodation with imperial authority and integration into existing Roman administrative structures, while Theodoric the Amal pursued independent kingdom building that would establish Gothic political autonomy. Their rivalry played out through a series of military confrontations and diplomatic negotiations that tested both leaders' abilities to maintain warrior followings while managing relationships with imperial officials. The sudden death of Theodoric Strabo in 481 AD eliminated Theodoric's primary rival for Gothic leadership, while creating unprecedented opportunities for territorial expansion and political consolidation. The Amal leader moved swiftly to incorporate Strabo's followers into his own confederation, offering generous terms to warriors willing to transfer their allegiances while eliminating potential sources of future opposition. This crucial political merger significantly increased Theodoric's military resources, while demonstrating his exceptional ability to unite previously hostile Gothic factions under unified command. The momentous negotiations that led to Theodoric's commission to invade Italy represented the culmination of decades of careful diplomatic cultivation and meticulous military preparation. Emperor Zeno faced the persistent problem of Odoacer's independent kingdom in Italy, which had effectively removed the Western Roman Empire from imperial control, while maintaining nominal recognition of Eastern imperial authority. The Gothic solution offered exceptionally attractive advantages from Constantinople's perspective. Theodoric possessed sufficient military strength to challenge Odoacer successfully, while his departure from the Balkans would remove a potentially dangerous concentration of barbarian power from Constantinople's immediate vicinity. The arrangement promised to solve two critical problems simultaneously, eliminating Odoacer's troublesome independence, while redirecting Gothic ambitions away from Byzantine territories. For Theodoric, the Italian opportunity represented the ultimate prize, Brice, a chance to establish a kingdom worthy of his talents and ambitions. The rich territories of Italy, with their sophisticated urban centers, productive agricultural lands, and strategic position controlling Mediterranean trade routes, offered possibilities far exceeding anything available in the Balkans. The stage was set for one of history's most audacious conquests. The momentous formal arrangements concluded in 489 AD granted Theodoric imperial authorization to conquer Italy and govern it as Zeno's official representative. Though the precise terms of this historic agreement remain deliberately ambiguous in surviving sources, contemporary chronicles suggest that both parties understood the arrangement quite differently. Zeno expected continued imperial oversight and ultimate authority, while Theodoric anticipated practical independence once his military objectives had been successfully achieved. This calculated ambiguity allowed both sides to commit wholeheartedly to the arrangement, while preserving crucial flexibility for future renegotiation based on actual battlefield outcomes and political developments. The extensive preparations for the Italian expedition brilliantly demonstrated Theodoric's exceptional organizational capabilities and far-reaching strategic vision. The massive force he assembled included not only seasoned Gothic warriors, but also their entire families, livestock herds, and accumulated portable possessions, clearly indicating his intention to establish permanent settlement rather than conduct temporary military operations. Archaeological evidence strongly suggests that complete communities participated in this epic migration, bringing skilled craftsmen, dedicated clergy, and agricultural specialists, absolutely necessary for establishing sustainable territorial control across diverse Italian territories. The enormous logistical challenge of moving perhaps 100,000 people across the treacherous Alps required sophisticated planning and coordination that drew brilliantly upon both proven Roman administrative methods and traditional Germanic migration practices developed over centuries. The supply trains alone stretched for miles, carrying everything from weapons and armor to farming tools and household goods necessary for establishing new settlements in conquered territories. The massive Gothic host that descended from the Julian Alps in late summer 489 AD represented the absolute culmination of Theodoric's decades-long preparation for independent kingship. The seemingly endless columns stretched for miles across mountainous terrain, with heavily armed Gothic cavalry riding alongside ox-drawn wagons, carrying families, craftsmen, and the accumulated wealth of an entire people determined to carve out a new homeland. Theodoric himself rode proudly at the head of this historic migration, his commanding presence marked by the distinctive royal banner bearing the Amal dynasty's traditional wolf symbol, worked in gold thread against magnificent purple silk. The formidable army that followed him numbered approximately 20,000 seasoned warriors supported by auxiliary forces recruited from various allied tribes who had chosen to join the Italian venture rather than remain in the increasingly crowded and competitive Balkan territories. These weren't desperate refugees, but confident conquerors prepared to fight for the richest prize in the Western world. The strategic situation awaiting Theodoric in northern Italy had been carefully analysed through extensive intelligence networks established during his years of imperial service in Constantinople. Odoacer's kingdom, while nominally recognising Eastern imperial authority, had operated with complete practical independence since deposing the last Western Roman emperor in 476 AD. The Germanic king controlled a substantial military force built around Syrian, Rhogian, and Herulian warriors, supplemented by Roman units that had remained loyal after the catastrophic collapse of Western imperial administration. These combined forces, numbering perhaps 25,000 combat-effective troops, were strategically distributed across fortified positions throughout the Italian peninsula, with major concentrations at Ravenna, Milan, and Rome itself. Odoacer's carefully planned defensive strategy relied heavily on controlling key river crossings and mountain passes that dominated northern Italian geography, forcing any invader to attack well-prepared positions under disadvantageous circumstances. The Isonzo River, flowing from the Julian Alps toward the Adriatic Sea, represented the first major obstacle facing Theodoric's relentless advance. Here, Odoacer had positioned substantial forces under his capable nephew Tufa, who commanded a mixed army of Germanic warriors and Roman infantry units, equipped with traditional imperial weapons and armor. The elaborate defensive positions established along the river's eastern bank included timber palisades reinforced with sophisticated earthworks, designed to channel any attacking force into predetermined killing zones, where concentrated archery and javelin fire could inflict maximum casualties on exposed attackers. The decisive Battle of Isonzo, fought in late August 489 AD, brilliantly demonstrated Theodoric's exceptional ability to adapt proven Roman tactical methods to Gothic military traditions, while ruthlessly exploiting his enemy's strategic assumptions. Rather than attempting a costly direct frontal assault across the defended river, Theodoric divided his forces into multiple coordinated columns that approached the defensive positions from different directions simultaneously, confusing and overwhelming his enemies. His elite cavalry units, trained in mobility tactics learned during the Hunnic period, conducted elaborate diversionary attacks along the southern approaches, while his main infantry force prepared sophisticated crossing equipment upstream from the primary defensive positions. The carefully orchestrated Gothic assault began before dawn, with concentrated archery fire directed at the timber fortifications. Theodoric's skilled archers, many of whom had mastered composite bow techniques during their service under Hunnic command, maintained devastatingly accurate fire at ranges that prevented effective retaliation from defenders armed with shorter-range weapons. This suppressive fire allowed Gothic engineers to position portable bridges and fascines at carefully selected crossing points where the river's depth and current conditions favored rapid deployment of heavy infantry formations. The decisive breakthrough came when Gothic cavalry units successfully forded the river at an unexpected location several miles south of the main defensive line, catching Odoacer's forces completely by surprise. These mounted warriors, led by Theodoric's most trusted lieutenants, struck the rear of Odoacer's positions with devastating effect, while the main Gothic infantry assault developed across the prepared crossing points. The precise coordination required for this complex maneuver reflected the sophisticated command and control systems that Theodoric had developed through years of imperial military service, where accurate timing and communication between separated units often determined campaign outcomes. Tufa's forces, caught between converging Gothic attacks from multiple directions, attempted to withdraw in good order toward prepared secondary positions, but the lightning speed of the Gothic advance prevented effective disengagement. The organized retreat quickly devolved into a chaotic rout as Gothic cavalry pursued fleeing infantry across the open terrain beyond the river valley, cutting down stragglers and capturing valuable equipment. Archaeological evidence from sites along the probable battle route shows scattered weapon deposits and hastily buried coin hoards, suggesting that the defeat was both sudden and absolutely complete. Contemporary chroniclers reported that Tufa himself barely escaped capture, reaching Odoacer's main army with only a small fraction of his original force intact, bringing devastating news of the Gothic military superiority. The stunning victory at Isonzo provided Theodoric with immediate strategic advantages, extending far beyond the elimination of organized resistance in northeastern Italy. The captured equipment and supplies significantly augmented Gothic military capabilities, while the psychological impact of decisively defeating Odoacer's nephew demonstrated that the invading army possessed both tactical sophistication and proven battlefield effectiveness. More importantly, the speed and decisiveness of the victory encouraged local Italian populations to view Theodoric as a credible alternative to Odoacer's increasingly unpopular regime. The subsequent advance toward Verona revealed the complex relationship between Gothic military objectives and the political realities of governing a diverse Italian population with established traditions and expectations. As Theodoric's army moved through the fertile plains of the Veneto, his commanders faced constant decisions about how to treat civilian populations whose cooperation would be absolutely essential for long-term territorial control and economic prosperity. The Gothic king had issued strict orders prohibiting unauthorized plundering and violence against non-combatants, recognizing that his ultimate success depended entirely on convincing Italian landowners and urban populations that Gothic rule would provide stability and security, rather than chaos and exploitation. These carefully enforced restraints on military behavior reflected Theodoric's sophisticated understanding of the administrative challenges involved in governing a complex society with established legal traditions and intricate economic systems. Unlike simple raiding expeditions where immediate plunder represented the primary objective, the Italian campaign aimed at establishing permanent territorial control that would require ongoing cooperation from existing administrative, religious, and commercial elites. The Gothic king understood that conquest was only the beginning. Building a lasting kingdom would demand far greater skills than those needed for military victory alone. The march toward Verona would test whether Theodoric possessed the wisdom to transform military success into political legitimacy. The remarkable discipline maintained by Gothic forces during their methodical advance brilliantly demonstrated their commanders' exceptional ability to subordinate immediate military advantages to crucial long-term political objectives. The strategic approach to Verona in September 489 AD brought Theodoric face-to-face with Odoacer himself, who had assembled the largest army available for what both leaders recognized would be a decisive confrontation that would determine Italy's future. The Germanic king had astutely recognized that allowing the Gothic invasion to proceed unopposed would inevitably result in the complete loss of his kingdom, making a major battle unavoidable, despite the enormous tactical risks involved in confronting Theodoric's proven military machine. Odoacer's chosen position at Verona reflected sound strategic thinking, as the city's commanding location controlled vital access to the Alpine passes, while providing secure communications with his remaining strongholds scattered throughout the peninsula. The massive armies that confronted each other outside Verona's ancient walls represented two fundamentally different approaches to organizing military force in post-imperial Italy. Odoacer's diverse troops included substantial numbers of Roman infantry units that still maintained traditional imperial equipment and time-tested formations, supported by Germanic warriors who fought in their ancestral styles with legendary long swords, broad-bladed spears, and distinctive round shields. This tactical combination had proved remarkably effective in earlier campaigns against various threats, but it required extremely careful coordination between units with completely different tactical doctrines and command structures developed over centuries. The mixed nature of Odoacer's army also created significant communication problems, as battlefield orders had to be transmitted in multiple languages to ensure proper comprehension across ethnically diverse formations operating under unified command. Theodoric's forces, by stark contrast, had achieved far greater tactical integration through years of combined training and extensive campaign experience under unified Gothic leadership. Gothic warriors equipped with traditional Germanic weapons fought seamlessly alongside cavalry units trained in steppe warfare techniques, while specialized siege engineers provided advanced capabilities learned through imperial military service. The streamlined command structure reflected this superior integration, with Gothic nobles leading mixed formations that could rapidly adapt their tactics to changing battlefield conditions without requiring complex coordination between separate ethnic contingents. The epic Battle of Verona, fought on September 30th, 489 AD, began with extended archery exchanges as both armies methodically tested their opponents' defensive formations and sought tactical advantages. Odoacer's forces, deployed in traditional Roman battle order with infantry concentrated in the center and cavalry positioned on the flanks, initially held their positions effectively against Gothic probing attacks designed to identify weaknesses. However, Theodoric's superior tactical flexibility soon became devastatingly apparent as his experienced commanders shifted their formations to ruthlessly exploit discovered weaknesses in the enemy deployment. Gothic cavalry units, operating with the exceptional mobility learned during their service under Hunnic command, repeatedly struck at exposed flanks before withdrawing beyond the range of effective retaliation, gradually wearing down enemy cohesion and morale. The decisive moment arrived when Theodoric personally led a thunderous cavalry charge against Odoacer's vulnerable left wing, where communication problems between Roman and Germanic units had created dangerous gaps in the defensive line. The Gothic king's dramatic presence at the critical point of attack provided both essential tactical leadership and powerful psychological inspiration for his warriors, who pressed their advantage with the legendary ferocity that had characterized Germanic warfare for centuries. Contemporary accounts vividly describe Theodoric fighting courageously in the front ranks with his traditional long sword, his distinctive armor marking him as a prime target for enemy missiles, while inspiring his devoted followers to extraordinary efforts that would echo through history. Odoacer's army, despite offering fierce resistance worthy of their reputation, could not maintain essential cohesion under the sustained Gothic pressure that threatened to shatter their entire formation. The breakthrough on the left wing allowed Theodoric's cavalry to systematically roll up the entire defensive line, forcing a general retreat that quickly devolved into a chaotic rout. The fleeing troops abandoned their valuable equipment and essential supplies in their desperate haste to escape Gothic pursuit, providing the victorious Goths with substantial quantities of weapons, armor, and provisions that would prove invaluable in subsequent operations throughout the peninsula. Archaeological excavations in the vicinity of Verona have uncovered extensive weapon caches and hastily buried coin hoards that likely date to this pivotal battle, confirming both the enormous scale of Odoacer's defeat and the battle's historical significance for Italy's future development. The immediate aftermath of Verona brilliantly demonstrated Theodoric's rapidly growing political sophistication as he skillfully balanced military success with the complex diplomatic requirements of governing a sophisticated society with established traditions and expectations. Rather than pursuing the defeated army immediately to complete their destruction, he devoted several crucial weeks to consolidating control over northern Italy and establishing administrative arrangements that would ensure continued local cooperation essential for long-term stability. Gothic administrators, many of whom had acquired Roman bureaucratic methods during their imperial service in Constantinople, worked diligently to maintain existing tax collection systems while carefully adapting them to support the new regime's military and political requirements. This pragmatic approach demonstrated Theodoric's understanding that effective governance required continuity rather than revolutionary change. The enlightened treatment of captured Roman senators and other high-ranking officials revealed Theodoric's sophisticated strategy for managing the Italian aristocracy, whose support would be absolutely essential for long-term stability and administrative effectiveness. Rather than executing or imprisoning these potential rivals as many conquerors might have done, the Gothic king wisely offered them positions within his emerging administration, recognizing their invaluable expertise in legal, financial, and diplomatic matters that Gothic nobles traditionally lacked. This innovative policy of selective integration allowed Theodoric to benefit from Roman administrative experience, while demonstrating that Gothic rule would respect traditional social hierarchies and establish legal procedures that governed Italian society. The Catholic Church's complex response to Gothic conquest presented particular challenges, as Theodoric's Arian Christianity differed fundamentally from the Nicene orthodoxy that dominated Italian religious life and cultural identity. However, the Gothic king's enlightened policy of religious toleration, learned through careful observation of imperial practices during his formative years in Constantinople, prevented theological differences from becoming sources of active resistance that could destabilize his emerging kingdom. Catholic bishops who accepted Gothic political authority were permitted to maintain their positions and continue their pastoral duties uninterrupted, while church properties remained under ecclesiastical control rather than being confiscated for military purposes. The challenging siege of Ravenna, beginning in early 490 AD, represented the absolute culmination of Theodoric's Italian campaign and the ultimate test of his comprehensive military capabilities developed over decades of preparation. Odoacer had withdrawn to this heavily fortified capital after his crushing defeat at Verona, recognizing that the city's unique position amid extensive marshlands made it virtually impregnable to conventional assault methods. The formidable defensive advantages of Ravenna included not only its extraordinarily difficult terrain, but also its crucial access to the sea, which allowed continued communication with potential allies and the importation of essential supplies necessary for extended resistance against Gothic siege operations. The Gothic approach to besieging Ravenna demonstrated the remarkable tactical sophistication that Theodoric had developed through decades of diverse military experience across multiple theatres. Rather than attempting costly direct assaults against the city's formidable fortifications, Gothic engineers began systematic construction of sophisticated siege works designed to isolate the defenders while providing protected positions for their own forces. These impressive fortifications, built according to proven Roman engineering principles learned during Theodoric's imperial service, included massive timber palisades, earthwork ramparts, and strategically positioned towers that commanded all approaches to the besieged city. The brilliant integration of Gothic cavalry tactics with Roman siege techniques created an increasingly effective blockade system that gradually tightened around Ravenna over the course of nearly 3 grueling years. Gothic horsemen operating from fortified camps positioned strategically throughout the surrounding marshlands systematically intercepted supply convoys and prevented communication between the besieged city and potential relief forces. Meanwhile, Gothic engineers constructed elaborate causeway approaches across the wetlands using fascines and stone fill to create solid foundations for siege equipment that could threaten the city's walls directly. The prolonged nature of the siege severely tested both armies' endurance and logistical capabilities in ways that revealed their respective strengths and weaknesses. Theodoric's forces, supplied by the rich agricultural resources of northern Italy and supported by tribute from Italian cities that had submitted to Gothic authority, maintained their effectiveness throughout the extended campaign. Odoacer's garrison, by stark contrast, faced increasing shortages of food and military supplies as the Gothic blockade proved devastatingly effective. Contemporary sources describe growing desperation within Ravenna as the civilian population suffered from severe malnutrition, while military effectiveness declined due to inadequate equipment, maintenance, and plummeting morale. The final phase of the siege would determine not just military victory but the very nature of Gothic rule in Italy. The historic agreement reached in February 493 AD appeared to offer a reasonable compromise that would finally allow both kings to share power throughout Italy, while ending the destructive warfare that had devastated much of the peninsula for nearly 4 years. According to the negotiated terms, Odoacer would retain his royal title and continue governing certain designated territories, while Theodoric would assume overall leadership of the combined Gothic and Syrian military forces. This innovative arrangement reflected the complex realities of post-imperial politics, where practical power sharing often proved far more effective than attempts to achieve complete military victory through continued bloodshed. The elaborate banquet held at Ravenna on March 15th, 493 AD, ostensibly organized to celebrate the promising new political arrangement, became instead the shocking scene of Odoacer's brutal assassination. Theodoric, either acting on carefully predetermined plans developed months in advance or responding to immediate circumstances that threatened the fragile stability of the agreement, killed his rival with his own sword during the ceremonial feast. Contemporary accounts provide frustratingly conflicting details about the specific events that led to this sudden violence, but the ultimate outcome was devastatingly clear for Italy's future. Theodoric had permanently eliminated his primary rival for control of the Italian peninsula, while simultaneously demonstrating to potential opponents throughout his territories that he possessed both the unwavering will and proven capability to use decisive force when circumstances demanded such action. The calculated murder of Odoacer, followed immediately by the systematic elimination of his principal supporters and potential successors, established Theodoric as the undisputed ruler of Italy, with absolute authority over both Gothic and Roman populations. The Gothic king's formal assumption of the prestigious title Rex Italiae marked the official beginning of Ostrogothic royal authority over the entire Italian peninsula. Though the monumental practical challenges of governing this extraordinarily complex territory would require decades of careful political and administrative development, the ambitious conquest that had begun with the dramatic crossing of the Isonzo River had culminated triumphantly in the establishment of the most successful barbarian kingdom in post-imperial Europe. The sophisticated administrative apparatus that Theodoric constructed, following his consolidation of absolute power in Italy, represented one of the most remarkable attempts at cultural synthesis in early medieval European history. The Gothic king faced the unprecedented challenge of governing a diverse population that was perhaps 90% Roman, while simultaneously maintaining the unwavering loyalty of his Gothic warriors, who naturally expected traditional Germanic leadership structures and customary privileges. His brilliant solution involved creating innovative parallel administrative systems that allowed both populations to operate according to their respective customary legal and cultural frameworks, while ensuring unified political control under Amal royal authority. This revolutionary approach demonstrated Theodoric's exceptional understanding of the complex political dynamics required to govern a multi-ethnic kingdom successfully. The magnificent palatium at Ravenna became the bustling nerve center of this intricate governmental system, housing both Gothic royal household officials and Roman bureaucratic departments that had survived from the imperial period with their institutional knowledge intact. Theodoric retained the invaluable services of experienced Roman administrators like Cassiodorus, whose distinguished family had served imperial governments for generations, while simultaneously appointing trusted Gothic nobles to crucial military commands and territorial governorships that required direct control over warrior populations. This ingenious dual structure allowed the king to benefit from Roman expertise in taxation, legal procedures, and diplomatic protocols, while maintaining the essential personal loyalty bonds that formed the unshakable foundation of Germanic political authority. The arrangement proved remarkably effective in bridging cultural differences that could otherwise have created insurmountable tensions within the kingdom. The comprehensive legal framework governing Ostrogothic Italy reflected this same fundamental principle of parallel systems operating harmoniously under unified royal oversight. Romans continued to live under traditional Roman law, administered by experienced Roman judges using established legal procedures and precedents developed during centuries of imperial evolution. Gothic populations, meanwhile, followed customary Germanic law codes that emphasized personal honor, kinship obligations, and compensation payments for various offenses committed within their communities. The king's court served as the ultimate appellate authority for both legal systems, with Theodoric personally hearing complex cases that involved disputes between Goths and Romans, or matters that directly affected royal prerogatives and governmental stability. This judicial arrangement prevented legal conflicts from becoming sources of ethnic tension, while ensuring consistent application of justice throughout the kingdom. The military organization that supported this administrative structure brilliantly combined Gothic warrior traditions with proven Roman tactical methods and sophisticated logistical systems developed over centuries of imperial experience. The regular army consisted primarily of Gothic heavy cavalry and infantry units, organized around traditional comitatus relationships between nobles and their armed retainers, maintaining the personal bonds that motivated Germanic warriors. These formidable forces maintained their ancestral weapons and proven fighting techniques, while incorporating advanced Roman siege equipment, engineering capabilities, and standardized supply systems that enabled sustained military operations across the Italian peninsula. Roman military units that had previously served under Odoacer were largely disbanded, though individual soldiers who demonstrated genuine loyalty to the new regime could earn positions within Gothic formations through merit and service. Provincial administration throughout Italy relied heavily on existing Roman institutional frameworks that had proven effective during centuries of imperial rule and possessed the administrative expertise necessary for governing complex urban societies. The established system of provincial governors, municipal magistrates, and local administrative councils continued to function under Gothic oversight, collecting taxes, maintaining essential public works, and adjudicating legal disputes according to time-tested procedures. Gothic counts appointed directly by Theodoric supervised these Roman officials, ensuring that local administration served royal interests while respecting traditional privileges and customs that maintained crucial social stability. This system preserved administrative continuity while establishing clear lines of authority that prevented conflicts between different levels of government. The enlightened economic policies implemented during Theodoric's reign demonstrated his sophisticated understanding that Italian prosperity depended entirely on maintaining commercial networks that had sustained Mediterranean trade for centuries. The Gothic king actively promoted merchant activities by ensuring the security of trade routes, standardizing weights and measures across his territories, and negotiating favorable commercial agreements with other kingdoms and the Eastern Roman Empire. Italian agricultural production, which had declined significantly during the devastating warfare of the late 5th century, recovered remarkably under Gothic protection as landowners gained confidence in the stability and security of the new regime. The restoration of Italy's essential physical infrastructure became one of Theodoric's most visible achievements and served as a powerful symbol of Gothic commitment to Italian welfare and prosperity. The ancient Roman road system, which had deteriorated badly during decades of political instability and insufficient maintenance funding, received systematic attention from Gothic engineers who skillfully combined traditional Roman construction techniques with practical innovations learned during their extensive military campaigns. The vital Via Flaminia, connecting Rome with Ravenna, underwent extensive reconstruction that included new bridges designed to withstand flooding, improved drainage systems, and reinforced roadbeds capable of supporting heavy military traffic and commercial transport. Ambitious aqueduct restoration projects throughout the Italian peninsula demonstrated the Gothic regime's serious commitment to urban welfare and its ability to mobilize the technical expertise necessary for complex engineering undertakings that required both planning and execution skills. The ancient aqueducts serving Rome, Milan, and other major cities had suffered from severe neglect and deliberate damage during the political upheavals of the previous century. Gothic engineers working alongside Roman technical specialists methodically rebuilt damaged sections using traditional construction methods, while implementing significant improvements that increased water flow capacity and overall system reliability. These projects required enormous investments of resources and labor, demonstrating the kingdom's growing prosperity and administrative competence. The strategically important harbour facilities at Ravenna received particular attention as Theodoric recognized their crucial importance for both military operations and expanding commercial activities. The port installations, which had previously served as the primary naval base for the Western Roman Empire, required extensive dredging and reconstruction to accommodate the increasing volume of trade flowing through Gothic territories. New warehouses constructed using quality timber from the Alpine regions combined with stone quarried from traditional Roman sources provided secure storage for goods awaiting shipment to destinations throughout the Mediterranean basin, facilitating the commercial expansion that would define Theodoric's reign. The Ostrogothic kingdom had emerged as Europe's most successful example of barbarian governance, blending the best elements of both Germanic and Roman traditions into something entirely new and remarkably effective. Theodoric's enlightened religious policies reflected his sophisticated understanding of the complex theological divisions that deeply divided Italian society and constantly threatened political stability throughout his territories. As an Arian Christian ruling over a predominantly Catholic population with centuries-old religious traditions, the Gothic king faced relentless pressure to either convert to Nicene orthodoxy or impose Arian beliefs on his Roman subjects through royal decree. His masterful solution involved maintaining strict religious neutrality in governmental affairs while protecting the fundamental rights of both Christian communities to practice their respective theological traditions without interference or persecution. This groundbreaking approach demonstrated remarkable political wisdom that would influence religious policy throughout medieval Europe. The delicate relationship between the Ostrogothic court and the Catholic Church developed along carefully balanced lines that respected royal authority while preserving ecclesiastical independence in spiritual matters. Catholic bishops retained complete control over their dioceses and valuable church properties, while acknowledging Theodoric's political supremacy and accepting his legitimate role in resolving disputes that affected public order and stability. The king appointed qualified Catholic clergy to important positions within his administration, where their extensive education and proven diplomatic skills proved invaluable, while ensuring that Arian priests maintained their traditional roles within Gothic military and court circles. This pragmatic arrangement satisfied both religious communities, while strengthening governmental effectiveness. The papacy's unique position under Gothic rule presented particularly challenging circumstances, as the Bishop of Rome claimed universal spiritual authority that transcended political boundaries while residing within territories under Theodoric's direct control. The Gothic king generally supported papal prerogatives in religious matters, while insisting on royal approval for papal elections and major policy decisions that might affect relations with other kingdoms or the Eastern Roman Empire. This delicate arrangement allowed both parties to maintain their essential claims while avoiding direct confrontations that could destabilize Italian politics or trigger religious conflicts throughout the kingdom. The construction of magnificent new churches throughout Italy during Theodoric's prosperous reign demonstrated the Gothic commitment to genuine religious tolerance, while showcasing the impressive architectural capabilities of the combined Gothic-Roman administrative system. Arian churches built specifically for Gothic congregations incorporated traditional Germanic decorative elements with proven Roman construction techniques, creating distinctive architectural styles that perfectly reflected the cultural synthesis occurring throughout Gothic society. Catholic churches continued to receive substantial royal patronage for construction and renovation projects, ensuring that both religious communities could maintain adequate facilities for their worship and community activities. The extensive diplomatic networks that Theodoric established with other barbarian kingdoms created an intricate web of alliances that secured Italian borders while enhancing Gothic prestige throughout post-imperial Europe. Marriage alliances formed the cornerstone of this sophisticated diplomatic strategy, as royal weddings created powerful kinship bonds that transcended ethnic boundaries and provided effective mechanisms for resolving conflicts through negotiation rather than costly warfare. Theodoric's own strategic marriage to Ordofleda, sister of the powerful Frankish king Clovis, exemplified this approach by linking the Gothic and Frankish royal houses, despite their fundamentally different religious affiliations and competing territorial interests. The marriage of Theodoric's daughter Ostrogotha to Sigismund, heir to the Burgundian throne, created another crucial alliance that secured the vital Alpine passes connecting Italy with Gaul. This union brought together two prominent Arian royal families whose cooperation could effectively counter the growing influence of Catholic Frankish power in southeastern Gaul. The elaborate wedding ceremony held at Ravenna, featuring distinctive Gothic and Burgundian ceremonial elements, demonstrated the remarkable cultural sophistication that characterized diplomatic relations between barbarian kingdoms in the early 6th century. The strategic alliance with the Vandal kingdom in North Africa, sealed through the marriage of Theodoric's sister Amalafrida to King Thrasimund, created a powerful anti-Byzantine coalition that controlled much of the Western Mediterranean's crucial trade routes. This diplomatic arrangement provided mutual security guarantees while facilitating profitable commercial exchanges between Italian and African territories, significantly boosting both kingdoms' economies. The Vandal alliance also offered potential military cooperation against Eastern Roman attempts to reconquer former imperial territories in the west, creating a formidable barrier to Byzantine expansion. Relations with the Visigothic kingdom in Spain developed through both marriage alliances and territorial agreements that clearly defined spheres of influence in contested regions of southern Gaul. Theodoric's daughter Theodocothe married the Visigothic king Alaric II, creating essential kinship bonds that facilitated cooperation in military and diplomatic matters affecting both kingdoms. When aggressive Frankish expansion threatened Visigothic territories, Theodoric provided substantial military assistance that demonstrated the practical value of these alliance systems, while establishing Gothic influence in regions far beyond the Italian peninsula. The remarkable economic prosperity that characterized Theodoric's golden reign reflected both the security provided by effective government and the revival of commercial networks that had been severely disrupted during the political upheavals of the late 5th century. Italian agricultural production increased dramatically as landowners invested confidently in improvements to their estates, secure that Gothic protection would allow them to retain the benefits of their investments. The cultivation of previously unused lands, particularly in the fertile Po Valley, where Gothic settlers had established thriving agricultural communities, expanded the kingdom's food production capacity while providing valuable economic opportunities for both Gothic and Roman populations. Manufacturing activities throughout Italy experienced substantial growth as skilled craftsmen gained reliable access to raw materials through revived trade networks, while benefiting from stable political conditions that encouraged long-term business planning and investment. Textile production centered in prosperous cities like Milan and Florence supplied both expanding domestic markets and lucrative export trade with other Mediterranean regions, creating wealth that supported urban growth and cultural development. Metalwork shops in Rome and other urban centers produced weapons, tools, and decorative objects that brilliantly combined traditional Roman techniques with Gothic artistic preferences, creating distinctive products that found eager markets throughout barbarian Europe. The sophisticated monetary system established under Gothic rule maintained proven Roman standards and denominations, while featuring royal imagery that proclaimed Theodoric's authority throughout Italian territories. Gold solidi bearing the king's portrait and official titles circulated alongside Byzantine coins, creating a stable currency system that facilitated both local commerce and international trade relationships. The continued operation of mints in Rome, Milan, and Ravenna ensured adequate supplies of coinage while providing visible symbols of Gothic sovereignty that reinforced royal authority in daily economic transactions throughout the kingdom. Commercial relations with the Eastern Roman Empire developed successfully, despite underlying political tensions between Theodoric and successive Byzantine emperors who viewed Gothic success with suspicion and concern. Italian merchants maintained profitable access to Constantinople's markets, while Byzantine goods continued to flow into Italian territories, creating mutual economic benefits that both sides recognized as valuable regardless of their political differences. The Gothic court's diplomatic correspondence with Constantinople, preserved in the eloquent letters of Cassiodorus, reveals the complex negotiations required to maintain these commercial relationships while managing competing territorial claims and persistent religious disputes that threatened regional stability. The outstanding cultural achievements of Theodoric's reign reflected the successful integration of Gothic and Roman intellectual traditions under enlightened royal patronage that actively encouraged learning and artistic production. The court at Ravenna became a renowned center of scholarship, where Gothic nobles and Roman intellectuals collaborated on literary projects that preserved classical knowledge while adapting it to contemporary political and social needs. The translation of important Latin texts into Gothic script, undertaken by scholars like Jordanes, ensured that traditional Germanic culture could coexist harmoniously with Roman literary heritage, creating a unique cultural synthesis that would influence European development for centuries. Architectural projects throughout Italy during this golden period demonstrated the remarkable synthesis of Gothic and Roman building traditions that characterized Ostrogothic material culture. The magnificent palace complex at Ravenna, expanded and renovated under Theodoric's personal direction, incorporated traditional Roman architectural elements with distinctive Germanic decorative motifs, that proclaimed royal identity while respecting established Italian aesthetic preferences. Theodoric's reign represented the pinnacle of barbarian achievement in post-Roman Europe, creating a stable, prosperous kingdom that successfully balanced Germanic traditions with Roman sophistication. His legacy would inspire future rulers while demonstrating that barbarian peoples could not only conquer Roman territories, but govern them with wisdom, justice, and remarkable effectiveness. The Ostrogothic kingdom under Theodoric the Great had become the envy of Europe, proving that the age of barbarian chaos could give way to unprecedented prosperity and cultural achievement when leadership combined military prowess with political wisdom and genuine respect for the diverse peoples under their rule. Religious structures, governmental edifices, and residential dwellings erected throughout this transformative era showcased remarkable fusions of cultural elements that mirrored the extensive social unification taking place across the entire realm. The academic framework that flourished under Gothic leadership maintained Roman instructional heritage, while modifying these systems to address the requirements of an ethnically varied population spread throughout Italian territories. Educational institutions in prominent urban centers continued delivering classical instruction in oratory, linguistics, and literary studies, utilizing established Roman academic programs, while Gothic aristocrats increasingly enrolled their offspring in these prestigious establishments to obtain capabilities essential for bureaucratic and ambassadorial professions. This scholarly integration produced an entire generation of Gothic and Roman leadership, who possessed shared intellectual foundations despite their contrasting ethnic heritage and cultural backgrounds. The remarkable intellectual revival that thrived under Theodoric's generous sponsorship represented one of early medieval Europe's most extraordinary accomplishments, as Gothic royal funding supported the conservation and dissemination of classical knowledge through brilliant scholars whose contributions would shape European civilization for countless generations. The magnificent court at Ravenna became an irresistible attraction for educated Romans who understood that this barbarian monarch provided superior protection for traditional scholarship compared to the increasingly volatile political circumstances prevailing in other former Western imperial regions. These distinguished intellectuals discovered in Theodoric a sovereign who comprehended the practical benefits of Roman administrative knowledge while genuinely valuing the cultural legacy that classical learning embodied. His court became a beacon of enlightenment, where ancient wisdom merged seamlessly with contemporary governance needs, creating unprecedented opportunities for scholarly advancement. Anicius Manlius Severinus Boethius emerged as arguably the most influential personality in this intellectual flourishing, his remarkable career exemplifying the successful fusion of Roman philosophical heritage with the pragmatic requirements of Gothic administration. Born approximately 480 AD into Rome's most prestigious senatorial lineage, Boethius obtained the finest classical training available, mastering rhetoric, mathematics, and philosophy through traditional Roman methodologies, while simultaneously developing Greek fluency that granted him direct access to Aristotelian and Platonic manuscripts. His elevation to prominent administrative roles under Theodoric demonstrated both his intellectual excellence and his family's political influence, but more significantly illustrated the Gothic monarch's dedication to recruiting exceptional talent regardless of ethnic origins. The scholarly endeavors that Boethius pursued during his years of royal service focused on preserving and conveying the complete collection of classical wisdom to subsequent generations through careful translation and commentary. His translations of Aristotelian logical treatises into Latin supplied medieval academics with their fundamental access to Greek philosophical methodologies, while his detailed commentaries on these complex works explained intricate concepts using language comprehensible to readers lacking extensive philosophical preparation. The mathematical compositions he authored, encompassing arithmetic, geometry, and musical theory, became standard educational materials in European academies for over 5 centuries. Their lucid explanations and methodical organization making abstract principles understandable to students throughout the medieval era. The bureaucratic duties that consumed substantial portions of Boethius's time involved supervising the sophisticated financial mechanisms supporting Theodoric's administration while preserving the delicate equilibrium between Gothic military requirements and Roman civilian expectations. His role as Magister Officiorum demanded oversight of the comprehensive palace bureaucracy, coordinating activities across numerous departments, handling everything from revenue collection to diplomatic communication. The remarkable efficiency characterizing these systems under his guidance prove that Roman administrative approaches remained exceptionally effective when properly executed, even under barbarian political control. The theological compositions Boethius produced during this period reflected his ambitious attempt to harmonize classical philosophical reasoning with Christian teaching, establishing intellectual frameworks that would influence medieval theology for centuries. His treatises examining the Trinity employed Aristotelian logical techniques to analyze complex theological questions, while his explorations of divine providence and human free will addressed fundamental issues concerning both classical philosophers and Christian scholars. These masterful works demonstrated that Gothic patronage could sustain the highest levels of intellectual investigation, as royal resources enabled academics to pursue sophisticated theoretical research without immediate practical constraints. Magnus Aurelius Cassiodorus Senator represented another dimension of the intellectual synthesis flourishing under Gothic governance. His distinguished career, spanning both administrative service and scholarly achievement in ways that prove the compatibility of practical leadership with serious academic pursuit. Born around 485 AD into a family that had served Roman governments for generations, Cassiodorus inherited both administrative expertise and cultural knowledge that rendered him indispensable to Theodoric's regime. His appointment as quaestor, responsible for composing official documents and royal correspondence, positioned him at the center of Gothic diplomatic and administrative operations, while providing unique opportunities to observe barbarian kingship from the highest governmental levels. The official communications Cassiodorus crafted on Theodoric's behalf, later assembled in his Varia, offer invaluable insights into daily operations of the Ostrogothic kingdom, while showcasing the sophisticated rhetorical abilities that Roman education continued producing. These documents, addressing subjects ranging from judicial appointments to public construction projects, reveal the monarch's meticulous attention to administrative details, while highlighting the classical learning that informed Gothic governmental practices. The elaborate Latin prose characterizing these letters served both practical and symbolic purposes, conducting official business while proclaiming the cultural sophistication of the Gothic court to audiences throughout the Mediterranean world. The historical compositions Cassiodorus produced, including his chronicle and his lost Gothic history, attempted integrating Germanic tribal traditions with Roman historical writing methods, creating narratives that legitimized Gothic rule while preserving established Roman literary conventions. His chronicle provided comprehensive coverage of world history, from creation to contemporary times, positioning Gothic achievements within the broader framework of divine providence and historical progression. The Gothic history, known primarily through its influence on Jourdain's later Getica, presented the Ostrogoths as worthy inheritors of Roman imperial authority, emphasizing their military excellence and cultural accomplishments, while minimizing violent aspects of their Italian conquest. The educational establishments Cassiodorus founded at his monastery of Vivarium represented his most enduring contribution to European intellectual development, creating systematic programs for preserving and transmitting classical learning through the turbulent centuries following Roman political collapse. The extensive library he assembled contained both pagan classical texts and Christian theological works, recognizing that complete education required familiarity with Mediterranean civilization's entire heritage. The copying workshops he organized employed dozens of scribes producing manuscripts that preserved essential texts through early medieval political upheavals, ensuring cultural continuity across generations. Quintus Aurelius Memmius Symmachus embodied the continuation of traditional Roman senatorial culture under Gothic authority, his career proving that aristocratic families could maintain social positions and cultural values while accepting barbarian political leadership. Born into Rome's ancient nobility around 460 AD, Symmachus inherited both vast wealth and prestigious social connections that had sustained his family through centuries of political transformation. His marriage to Boethius's daughter created kinship bonds linking two of Rome's most distinguished senatorial houses, while demonstrating that traditional aristocratic alliances continued flourishing under Gothic rule. The philosophical salons Symmachus hosted at his Roman palace brought together intellectuals from across Italy, creating forums for scholarly discussion that preserved classical academic traditions while adapting them to contemporary circumstances. These gatherings featured presentations on Aristotelian logic, Platonic metaphysics, and contemporary theological questions, maintaining intellectual standards that rivaled those of earlier imperial periods. The manuscripts collection Symmachus assembled in his private library represented one of early medieval Europe's most comprehensive scholarly resources, containing works by classical authors alongside contemporary Christian writings that reflected the cultural synthesis occurring throughout Gothic territories. His patronage of young scholars provided financial support, enabling promising intellectuals to pursue advanced studies without economic concerns, ensuring that classical learning continued attracting talented individuals despite changing political circumstances. The architectural projects Symmachus sponsored throughout Rome demonstrated wealthy Romans' continued commitment to beautifying their city while adapting classical artistic traditions to contemporary tastes and requirements. The palace renovations he commissioned featured traditional Roman architectural elements, enhanced with decorative motifs, reflecting Gothic artistic influences, creating distinctive styles that symbolize the cultural fusion characterizing Ostrogothic Italy. These building projects employed skilled craftsmen from both ethnic communities, fostering professional collaboration that strengthened social integration while preserving traditional artistic techniques. The Ostrogothic kingdom's cultural achievements under Theodoric's enlightened leadership represented medieval Europe's most successful synthesis of barbarian vitality with classical sophistication, creating a unique civilization that honored both Germanic heritage and Roman traditions while building something entirely new and remarkably effective for its diverse population. Born into Rome's most distinguished aristocratic lineage around 460 AD, Symmachus inherited not only enormous territorial wealth, but also the profound cultural obligations accompanying senatorial rank, including scholarly patronage, support for ancestral religious customs, and preservation of the intricate social ceremonies that defined aristocratic identity throughout Italian society. His dynamic relationship with Theodoric exemplified the reciprocal advantages emerging from productive cooperation between Gothic royal authority and Roman aristocratic resources, creating mutually beneficial partnerships that strengthened the kingdom's foundations. The extensive literary sponsorship Symmachus provided sustained both renowned scholars and talented younger intellectuals who otherwise would have lacked sufficient resources to pursue advanced academic studies in classical learning and contemporary theological inquiry. His magnificent private library, among contemporary Italy's most comprehensive collections, housed rare manuscripts that attracted dedicated scholars from throughout Europe while supplying research materials for ambitious projects, advancing understanding of classical literature, philosophy, and historical scholarship. The sophisticated scholarly assemblies hosted at his opulent Roman residence created informal academies where intellectual discussions flourished under luxurious and secure conditions that encouraged serious investigation into complex theoretical questions spanning multiple disciplines. These gatherings brought together the era's finest minds, fostering collaborative research that preserved classical traditions while adapting them to contemporary circumstances and political realities. The political activities engaging Symmachus during Theodoric's later reign involved him deeply in religious controversies that increasingly complicated relations between the Gothic kingdom and the Eastern Roman Empire's powerful influence. His prestigious appointment as papal envoy to Constantinople in 525 AD reflected both his exceptional diplomatic abilities and his family's traditional connections with imperial court circles, accumulated over generations of service. However, the mission's ultimate failure contributed significantly to the deteriorating relationship between Theodoric and his Roman subjects that would tragically characterize Gothic rule's final years. The devastating accusations of treason leading to his execution alongside Boethius demonstrated the inherent fragility of the remarkable cultural synthesis that had flourished magnificently during the kingdom's golden age of prosperity and achievement. The monumental architectural accomplishments marking Theodoric's reign represented the most visible expressions of cultural fusion occurring throughout Gothic society. as ambitious royal building projects brilliantly combined Germanic symbolic requirements with proven Roman engineering capabilities and refined Italian aesthetic preferences developed over centuries of artistic evolution. The magnificent mausoleum of Theodoric in Ravenna, begun around 520 AD, perfectly embodied this extraordinary synthesis through its revolutionary design, incorporating elements from multiple architectural traditions while creating something entirely unprecedented in European construction. The massive stone structure, built from pristine Istrian limestone quarried across the Adriatic and transported to Ravenna by sea, demonstrated both the kingdom's substantial economic resources and its exceptional ability to organize complex logistical operations spanning vast distances. The advanced construction techniques employed in the mausoleum's creation revealed the sophisticated engineering capabilities Gothic builders had developed through productive collaboration with Roman craftsmen and experienced architects. The building's most remarkable feature, a monolithic dome weighing over 300 tons, required revolutionary lifting methods combining traditional Roman engineering expertise with Germanic metalworking skills to create specialized equipment necessary for positioning such massive stone elements with unprecedented precision. The extraordinary precision characterizing the dome's cutting and fitting demonstrated complete mastery of stone carving techniques, rivaling the finest work of the imperial period at its artistic peak. The elaborate decorative elements incorporated into the mausoleum's design reflected the cultural preferences of both Gothic and Roman traditions, while creating distinctive artistic expressions belonging fully to neither heritage individually. The exterior walls featured carved friezes depicting traditional Germanic animal motifs, executed with technical precision characteristic of Roman sculptural workshops, while interior spaces incorporated stunning mosaic decorations, combining Christian symbolic elements with secular themes drawn from classical mythology. These ambitious decorative programs required intensive collaboration between artists from contrasting cultural backgrounds, each contributing specialized skills to create unified artistic statements of unprecedented sophistication. The mausoleum's symbolic significance extended far beyond its primary function as a royal tomb, serving as a permanent monument to Gothic legitimacy and cultural achievement destined to outlast the kingdom itself. The building's prominent position within Ravenna's urban landscape proclaimed royal authority to daily viewers throughout the city, while its architectural sophistication demonstrated that barbarian rulers could successfully patronize projects rivaling the greatest achievements of imperial Rome at its zenith. The inscription recording Theodoric's titles and accomplishments, carved in both elegant Latin and runic scripts, proclaimed the remarkable cultural synthesis characterizing his reign, while asserting Gothic claims to equal status with Roman imperial traditions accumulated over centuries of Mediterranean dominance. The extensive restoration projects Theodoric sponsored throughout Italy demonstrated his unwavering commitment to preserving physical infrastructure, supporting Italian prosperity, while showcasing Gothic capabilities in managing complex engineering undertakings requiring substantial resources and technical expertise. The comprehensive renovation of Rome's Circus Maximus, undertaken around 500 AD, required massive investments of both financial resources and technical knowledge to repair centuries of accumulated damage, while adapting the ancient structure to contemporary entertainment preferences and safety requirements. The ambitious project employed hundreds of skilled craftsmen working under Gothic supervision, their successful collaboration producing results satisfying both traditional Roman expectations and barbarian royal requirements for impressive public spectacles that demonstrated governmental competence and cultural sophistication. The systematic restoration of ancient Roman monuments throughout the Italian peninsula served both practical and symbolic functions, maintaining essential infrastructure while demonstrating Gothic respect for Italian cultural heritage and historical continuity. The repair of vital bridges along major roadways ensured continued commercial and military communications, while renovation of public buildings in Rome, Milan, and other significant cities provided visible evidence of royal concern for urban welfare and civic responsibility. These demanding projects required careful coordination between Gothic administrators and Roman technical specialists, their successful completion demonstrating the remarkable effectiveness of collaborative governmental systems Theodoric had established throughout his territories. The development of distinctive Ostrogothic material culture during this creative period reflected the gradual emergence of artistic traditions, incorporating elements from Germanic, Roman, and Byzantine sources while creating expressions belonging fully to none of these individual traditions independently. Gothic metalworkers adapted traditional cloisonné techniques to produce exquisite jewelry and decorative objects featuring Roman mythological subjects, rendered in Germanic artistic styles, while Roman craftsmen incorporated barbarian decorative motifs into traditional Mediterranean art forms. This productive cultural cross-fertilization produced artistic expressions reflecting the complex ethnic composition of Ostrogothic society, while creating new aesthetic standards that would influence European artistic development for generations. The polychrome jewelry tradition flourishing under Gothic patronage represented perhaps the most successful fusion of different artistic heritages, combining Germanic metalworking techniques with precious gemstones and decorative materials imported from across the Mediterranean world's extensive trading networks. Gothic workshops in Ravenna and other Italian cities produced elaborate fibulae, belt fittings, and personal ornaments incorporating garnets from India, pearls from the Red Sea, and gold worked according to techniques learned from Byzantine craftsmen. These magnificent objects served both functional and symbolic purposes, displaying their owners' wealth and status, while proclaiming their participation in the cosmopolitan culture of the sophisticated Ostrogothic court. The manuscript illumination developing in scriptoriums associated with Gothic patronage demonstrated similar patterns of cultural synthesis as traditional Roman book production methods, incorporated decorative elements drawn from Germanic artistic traditions. The illuminated manuscripts produced for Gothic court members featured elaborate initial letters decorated with interlaced animal motifs characteristic of barbarian art, while maintaining classical proportions and spatial organization defining Roman book design excellence. These precious manuscripts served both practical functions as texts for scholarly study and ceremonial purposes as symbols of royal cultural sophistication and intellectual patronage. The comprehensive legal codification efforts undertaken during Theodoric's reign reflected his sophisticated understanding of administrative challenges involved in governing an ethnically diverse population while maintaining social stability and political legitimacy across varied communities. The principle of personality of law, allowing different ethnic groups to live according to their traditional legal customs, required complex administrative arrangements, accommodating multiple legal systems, operating simultaneously within identical territorial boundaries. Gothic administrators developed sophisticated procedures for determining which legal tradition applied to specific cases, while ensuring royal authority remained supreme over all local jurisdictions. The Edictum Theodorici, promulgated around 500 AD, represented the most systematic attempt to codify legal principles governing Ostrogothic Italy, while respecting diverse legal traditions existing within the kingdom's population. This groundbreaking legal code addressed primarily criminal matters and administrative procedures affecting public order, establishing uniform standards for offences like theft, assault, and treason, while allowing civil disputes resolution according to customary laws of involved parties. The code's provisions demonstrated careful balance between Germanic legal concepts, emphasizing personal honor and compensation, with Roman legal principles, focusing on state authority and systematic jurisprudence developed over centuries. The administrative procedures developed for implementing this revolutionary dual legal system required extensive training for judges and court officials needing to understand principles governing both Gothic and Roman legal traditions. This extraordinary synthesis of law, culture, and governance represented Theodoric's greatest achievement, creating a kingdom that honored both its barbarian origins and Roman heritage, while building something entirely new and remarkably effective. Legal academies established in major Italian urban centers provided comprehensive instruction in comparative jurisprudence, training aspiring administrators to navigate the intricate relationships between different legal systems, while ensuring consistent application of royal authority throughout the diverse kingdom. These pioneering educational programs produced an entire generation of legal professionals capable of managing the sophisticated judicial arrangements that made Ostrogothic governance not only possible but remarkably effective across ethnic boundaries. The practical operation of separate legal systems within unified political structures created unprecedented opportunities for legal innovation as accomplished jurists developed revolutionary procedures for resolving conflicts between different legal traditions that had never before coexisted under single governmental authority. Cases involving disputes between Goths and Romans required careful analysis to determine appropriate jurisdictional procedures and applicable legal frameworks, while mixed marriages and commercial partnerships created complex legal relationships that transcended traditional ethnic boundaries and challenged established precedents. The innovative solutions developed for these intricate situations contributed significantly to the evolution of legal concepts that would profoundly influence European jurisprudence for centuries, establishing precedents for managing multicultural societies under unified governmental systems. These legal innovations demonstrated that barbarian kingdoms could not only preserve Roman legal traditions, but actively contribute to their continued development and refinement. The death of Theodoric the Great on August 30th, 526 AD, at his magnificent palace in Ravenna, marked the end of an extraordinary era that had witnessed the most successful barbarian kingdom in post-imperial Europe reach unprecedented heights of political stability, cultural achievement, and administrative sophistication. The great king's final months had been tragically shadowed by the executions of Boethius and Symmachus, controversial decisions that revealed the underlying tensions between Gothic royal authority and Roman aristocratic expectations that his earlier enlightened policies had successfully managed to contain through diplomatic balance. As Theodoric's body lay in state within the magnificent mausoleum he had constructed as his eternal monument to Gothic achievement, the Ostrogothic nobility faced the daunting challenge of maintaining the delicate equilibrium between Germanic warrior traditions and Roman administrative sophistication that had sustained their kingdom's remarkable prosperity for over 3 decades of unprecedented success. The succession arrangements Theodoric had established before his death reflected his acute awareness of the potential instabilities that could threaten Ostrogothic unity following the loss of his personal authority and charismatic leadership. His grandson, Athalaric, son of his deceased daughter Amalasuntha and her husband Eutharic, represented the legitimate continuation of the prestigious Amal royal bloodline through direct descent. However, the boy's tender age of barely 10 years necessitated a regency government that would test the kingdom's institutional structures in ways that Theodoric's direct rule had never required. The appointment of Amalasuntha as regent demonstrated the deceased king's confidence in his daughter's exceptional political acumen and her sophisticated understanding of the complex diplomatic relationships that sustained Ostrogothic independence in an increasingly hostile world. However, it also placed unprecedented authority in the hands of a woman whose exercise of power would challenge traditional Germanic concepts of royal leadership based on masculine warrior prowess and personal military achievement. Amalasuntha's education and preparation for political responsibility had been exceptional even by the standards of the sophisticated Ostrogothic court, which had always emphasized comprehensive training for royal family members. Born around 495 AD during the height of her father's power and influence, she had received intensive instruction in both Gothic warrior traditions and Roman administrative methods, acquiring fluency in Latin, Greek, and Gothic that enabled her to communicate effectively with all segments of the kingdom's remarkably diverse population. Her carefully arranged marriage to Eutharic, a Gothic noble of royal Amal lineage who had been recalled from Spain specifically to strengthen dynastic succession, had been designed to combine political necessity with personal compatibility. This union produced not only the required heir, but also demonstrated successful integration of Gothic and Roman cultural elements within the royal family itself, embodying the synthesis that characterized Theodoric's reign. The regency government Amalasuntha, established following her father's death, attempted to maintain the administrative systems and diplomatic relationships that had sustained Ostrogothic prosperity, while adapting to changed circumstances created by the succession of a minor to the throne. The royal council advising the regent included both Gothic military commanders who had served Theodoric faithfully for decades, and Roman administrators whose expertise in legal and financial matters remained essential for effective governance of Italian territories. This collaborative approach initially proved successful in maintaining internal stability and external security as potential rivals, recognized that any attempt to challenge the regency would face unified opposition from the kingdom's established political elite, who had benefited substantially from the existing system's stability and prosperity. The young King Ethelric's education became a crucial focal point for debates about the future direction of Ostrogothic society, as different factions within the nobility advocated competing visions of royal preparation that reflected deeper disagreements about cultural identity and political strategy for the kingdom's survival. Amalasuntha favored a comprehensive educational program that would equip her son with both the classical learning necessary for diplomatic relations with the Eastern Roman Empire and the military skills required for effective leadership of Gothic warrior bands. This balanced approach emphasized the cultural synthesis that had characterized Theodoric's successful reign, viewing intellectual sophistication and martial prowess as complementary rather than competing elements of royal authority, essential for governing a diverse kingdom. The Gothic military aristocracy, however, increasingly expressed serious concerns that excessive emphasis on Roman educational methods would fundamentally undermine the young king's credibility with warrior followers, who valued traditional Germanic concepts of leadership based on personal courage and martial achievement demonstrated through battlefield prowess. These nobles, many of whom had distinguished themselves during the Italian conquest and subsequent military campaigns throughout the Mediterranean, argued that royal education should prioritize horsemanship, weapons training, and the development of personal relationships with Gothic military commanders over the study of classical literature and Roman administrative procedures that seemed irrelevant to military leadership. Their concerns reflected broader anxieties about the gradual erosion of distinctive Gothic cultural identity under the persistent influence of Roman intellectual traditions that threatened to transform their people into mere imitators of their subjects, rather than proud conquerors maintaining their ancestral heritage. The emergence of distinct pro-Roman and pro-Gothic factions within the Ostrogothic court represented the crystallization of tensions that had remained largely dormant during Theodoric's lifetime, but now threatened to fragment the political consensus that had sustained the kingdom's remarkable stability and prosperity. The pro-Roman faction, led by nobles who had benefited substantially from the cultural synthesis policies of the previous reign, advocated continued cooperation with Constantinople and maintenance of the sophisticated administrative systems that had enabled effective governance of the Italian peninsula's complex urban societies. These leaders astutely recognized that Ostrogothic military strength alone could not sustain long-term control over a predominantly Roman population without the legitimacy that came from respecting established legal and cultural traditions that governed Italian social life. The pro-Gothic faction, by contrast, emphasized the urgent need to preserve distinctive Germanic cultural practices and political structures that differentiated the Ostrogoths from their Roman subjects, while maintaining the warrior ethos that had enabled their ancestors' remarkable military successes. These nobles argued passionately that excessive accommodation to Roman preferences had dangerously weakened Gothic military effectiveness and undermined the personal loyalty bonds between kings and warriors that formed the unshakable foundation of Germanic political authority, inherited from their ancestral homeland beyond the Danube. Their concerns were not merely cultural but reflected practical anxieties about the kingdom's ability to defend itself against external threats. If Gothic military traditions continued being diluted by Roman influences that prioritized administrative efficiency over warrior valor and personal heroism in battle, the diplomatic challenges confronting the Regency government intensified these internal divisions while creating opportunities for external enemies to exploit Ostrogothic political uncertainties and succession vulnerabilities. The Eastern Roman Empire under Emperor Justinian had begun implementing increasingly aggressive policies aimed at recovering former imperial territories in the West, viewing the succession of a minor as an opportune moment to challenge Ostrogothic control over Italy through military pressure and diplomatic subversion. Byzantine diplomatic missions to Ravenna combined expressions of friendship with subtle threats and offers of support for alternative claimants to Gothic royal authority, creating pressures that tested the Regency's ability to maintain unified responses to external challenges while managing internal factional disputes. The religious policies that had successfully maintained stability during Theodoric's reign became sources of increasing controversy as different factions advocated competing approaches to managing relationships between the Arian Gothic minority and the Catholic Roman majority, whose cooperation remained essential for governmental effectiveness. Amelisantha's continuation of her father's tolerant policies satisfied neither extreme, as pro-Gothic nobles demanded more aggressive promotion of Arian Christianity, while pro-Roman factions suggested that conversion to Catholicism might improve relations with both the Italian population and the Eastern Roman Empire's powerful influence. These religious debates reflected deeper questions about cultural identity and political strategy that threatened to undermine the careful balance that had sustained successful Ostrogothic rule. The papacy's relationship with the regency government became particularly complex as successive popes tested the boundaries of ecclesiastical independence, seeking to exploit the political uncertainties created by Theodoric's death to expand papal authority and reduce royal influence over church affairs. The kingdom that had once seemed invincible was beginning to fracture from within, its very success becoming the source of its ultimate weakness. While the Gothic court struggled desperately to maintain traditional policies without Theodoric's commanding personal authority to enforce compliance and unity, Pope John II, elected in 533 AD, proved far more assertive in defending Catholic interests than his accommodating predecessors, boldly challenging Gothic appointments to episcopal positions, while maintaining extensive correspondence with Constantinople that suggested potential disloyalty to Ostrogothic political authority and territorial sovereignty. These escalating ecclesiastical disputes created additional sources of dangerous tension within Italian society, while providing Byzantine agents with golden opportunities to cultivate support for imperial intervention among influential Catholic clergy and aristocrats who viewed Gothic rule as increasingly illegitimate and oppressive. The mounting military challenges that emerged during the tumultuous regency period revealed the devastating extent to which Ostrogothic defensive capabilities had become completely dependent on Theodoric's personal leadership and the intricate diplomatic relationships he had skillfully cultivated with neighbouring kingdoms throughout his remarkable reign. Aggressive Frankish expansion in southern Gaul directly threatened the territorial arrangements that had successfully secured the vital Alpine passes, while increasing Byzantine naval activities in the strategic Adriatic suggested ominous preparation for more aggressive intervention in Italian affairs that could threaten the kingdom's survival. The Gothic military response to these multiplying challenges lacked the coordination and strategic vision that had characterized operations under Theodoric's direct command and experienced leadership. As competing factions within the fractured court advocated different priorities for defensive preparations, the growing influence of Gothic military commanders who had not benefited from the cultural synthesis of the previous reign created additional sources of internal tension, as these leaders aggressively challenged the authority of nobles who had served in administrative positions under Theodoric's enlightened government. The warrior aristocracy's traditional expectations of royal generosity through distribution of plunder and territorial grants conflicted sharply with the financial constraints imposed by the urgent need to maintain expensive administrative systems and complex diplomatic relationships essential for governing Italian territories effectively. These mounting economic pressures forced the Regency government to make increasingly difficult choices between satisfying Gothic military demands and preserving the Roman cooperation that enabled effective governance of sophisticated Italian urban societies with their established expectations, cultural traditions. Amalasuntha's personal authority faced relentless challenges from influential Gothic nobles who questioned both her gender and her commitment to traditional Germanic political values, criticism that reflected broader anxieties about the direction of Ostrogothic cultural development and political identity. How the regent's obvious intellectual sophistication and her comfortable relationships with Roman administrators provided dangerous ammunition for opponents who argued that she had become too removed from essential Gothic warrior traditions to provide effective leadership during periods of external threat and internal division. These vicious personal attacks on the regent's legitimacy created political instabilities that encouraged ambitious nobles to consider alternative arrangements for royal succession that might restore traditional Germanic leadership principles based on masculine military prowess and warrior culture. The devastating conspiracy that culminated in Amalasuntha's brutal murder on April 30th, 535 AD, represented the violent resolution of tensions that had been building relentlessly throughout the Regency period between competing visions of Ostrogothic political and cultural identity that threatened to tear the kingdom apart from within. The plot involved influential Gothic nobles led by Theodahad, a member of the prestigious royal Amal family, whose claims to the throne were strengthened by his gender and his reputation for maintaining traditional Germanic values that appealed to conservative warrior aristocrats. The conspirators justified their treacherous actions by arguing that Amalasuntha's policies had dangerously weakened Gothic military effectiveness, while compromising the kingdom's independence through excessive accommodation to Roman and Byzantine interests that undermined Ostrogothic sovereignty. The assassination took place on the isolated island of Martana in Lake Bolsena, where Amalasuntha had been imprisoned following Theodahad's initial coup that had appeared to establish a joint monarchy, preserving the regent's life while transferring effective power to male royal authority, acceptable to traditional Gothic values. The remote location chosen for the murder reflected the conspirators' acute awareness that their actions would provoke strong reactions from both domestic supporters of the murdered queen and external powers that had maintained diplomatic relationships with the Regency government and viewed Amalasuntha as a legitimate ruler. The method of execution, reportedly strangulation in a bathhouse, combined practical efficiency with symbolic elements that emphasized the personal nature of the political conflict that had motivated this heinous crime against royal authority and political stability. The immediate consequences of Amalasuntha's murder extended far beyond internal political changes within the Ostrogothic kingdom, as news of the assassination provided Emperor Justinian with the perfect justification he had been seeking for direct military intervention in Italian affairs and territorial reconquest. The Byzantine emperor had maintained extensive correspondence with the murdered queen that could be interpreted as guaranteeing her personal safety, while her death removed a potential diplomatic partner who might have negotiated peaceful solutions to the territorial disputes that complicated relations between the Gothic kingdom and the Eastern Roman Empire's expansionist ambitions. The assassination thus transformed what had been primarily internal Ostrogothic political tensions into a dangerous international crisis that would ultimately threaten the kingdom's survival and independence through external military intervention and internal political fragmentation. Theodahad's assumption of royal authority following the successful elimination of his rival revealed the fundamental weaknesses in the political arrangements that the conspirators had established to justify their treacherous actions and legitimize their seizure of power. The new king's reputation for philosophical learning and personal piety, which had initially attracted support from nobles who viewed him as a more traditionally Gothic alternative to Amalasuntha's cosmopolitan leadership style, proved utterly inadequate preparation for the practical challenges of royal government during a period of external threat and internal division requiring decisive military and diplomatic leadership. His complete lack of military experience and his unfamiliarity with the intricate diplomatic relationships that sustained Ostrogothic independence created dangerous vulnerabilities that external enemies were quick to exploit for their territorial and political advantage. The catastrophic fragmentation of Gothic political unity that became apparent following Theodahad's accession reflected the deeper structural problems that Amalasuntha's murder had exposed rather than resolved through violent political change. The elimination of the Regency government had removed the institutional frameworks that had maintained cooperation between pro-Roman and pro-Gothic factions, leaving individual nobles to pursue their own selfish interests, without regard for broader kingdom-wide concerns or collective security against external threats. Military commanders began establishing independent relationships with their troops, while territorial governors explored opportunities for autonomous action that prioritized local security over central royal authority and unified defensive strategies against foreign invasion. The diplomatic isolation that quickly developed around Theodahad's illegitimate regime demonstrated the devastating extent to which Amalasuntha's murder had damaged Ostrogothic relationships with potential allies, while providing enemies with moral justification for aggressive action and territorial conquest. The Frankish kingdom, which had maintained generally cooperative relations with the previous government, began exploring opportunities for territorial expansion at Gothic expense, while the kingdom was weakened by internal divisions and external threats. The Vandal alliance that had provided crucial security in the Western Mediterranean dissolved completely as North African politics became increasingly unstable under Byzantine military pressure, leaving the Ostrogothic kingdom without reliable allies. These diplomatic reversals left the Ostrogothic kingdom facing multiple external threats, without the alliance systems that had previously deterred foreign intervention and provided mutual security guarantees essential for maintaining independence against powerful enemies. The internal rebellions that erupted across Italian territories following news of the royal assassination revealed the devastating extent to which Ostrogothic control had depended on the personal loyalty relationships that Theodoric had cultivated and Amalasuntha had attempted to maintain through diplomatic skill and administrative competence. Roman aristocrats who had accepted Gothic political authority under the previous arrangements began exploring alternatives that might provide better protection for their interests, while urban populations in major cities questioned whether continued Gothic rule could provide the security and prosperity that had justified their previous cooperation with barbarian authority. These domestic challenges created additional military burdens for a kingdom already facing external threats on multiple frontiers, while lacking the unity and leadership necessary for effective resistance against determined enemies. The massive Byzantine invasion force that assembled at Constantinople during the winter of 534–535 AD represented the most formidable military expedition launched by the Eastern Roman Empire since the failed attempt to recapture Vandal Africa under Emperor Leo I decades earlier. Justinian's momentous decision to intervene directly in Italian affairs reflected both opportunistic calculation and genuine strategic necessity, as the assassination of Amalasuntha had provided the moral justification required to overcome domestic opposition to expensive Western campaigns, while Ostrogothic political fragmentation offered realistic prospects for military success and territorial reconquest. The expedition's commanding general Belisarius brought extensive experience from successful campaigns against the Vandals in North Africa, along with veteran troops who had proven their effectiveness in combined operations involving cavalry, infantry, and naval forces operating in coordination across vast territories. The force assembled for the Italian campaign included not only traditional Roman legionary units, but also allied contingents from various barbarian peoples who had entered imperial service, creating a military machine capable of sustained operations against determined Gothic resistance, while adapting to the complex geographic and political conditions that characterized the Italian peninsula. The Gothic kingdom that Theodoric had built through military conquest, diplomatic skill, and administrative genius now faced its greatest test, weakened by internal division, diplomatic isolation, and leadership failures that had shattered the unity essential for survival against the greatest military power in the Mediterranean world. The stage was set for a conflict that would determine whether barbarian kingdoms could maintain their independence against renewed Roman imperial ambition, or whether the great experiment in Gothic Roman synthesis would collapse under the weight of its own internal contradictions and external pressures. The golden age of Ostrogothic achievement was ending, and with it, one of history's most remarkable attempts to blend barbarian vitality with classical civilization in a unified kingdom that had briefly promised a new model for post-Roman Europe. The emperor's strategic selection of Flavius Belisarius to command this crucial expedition demonstrated his acute recognition that the Italian venture would require the most capable military leadership available within the imperial hierarchy's vast pool of experienced commanders. Belisarius brought to his Italian command an exceptional combination of tactical innovation and strategic vision that had already proven decisively effective in the successful reconquest of Vandal North Africa, establishing his reputation as the empire's premier general. His revolutionary military reforms had brilliantly integrated traditional Roman infantry formations with mounted archer units recruited from Hun and other steppe peoples, creating sophisticated combined arms capabilities that could adapt to diverse battlefield conditions while maintaining the disciplined coordination that characterized imperial military doctrine developed over centuries of warfare. The carefully selected force of 7,500 troops under his direct command represented a meticulously chosen army that prioritized exceptional quality over sheer quantity, including 3,000 veteran infantry from the African campaigns, whose combat experience was invaluable. 1,000 Hun cavalry archers, whose mobility and devastating firepower had proven utterly destructive against Vandal forces, and 400 heavily armoured cataphracts, whose shock action could shatter enemy formations that had been disrupted by preliminary archery attacks. The substantial naval component of Belisarius's expedition reflected the Byzantine Empire's sophisticated recognition that control of Italian coastal waters would be absolutely essential for maintaining crucial supply lines and preventing Gothic forces from receiving external assistance from potential allies. The massive fleet of 500 vessels accompanying the invasion force included both military transports capable of rapid troop deployment and heavily armed dromons, equipped with Greek fire projectors that could neutralize enemy naval opposition through devastating incendiary attacks. Admiral John's masterful coordination of this maritime force demonstrated the sophisticated logistical planning characterizing Justinian's military preparations, as the fleet carried not only immediate combat supplies but also siege equipment, engineering tools, and provisions sufficient to sustain extended operations without dependence on local resources that might prove unreliable or hostile. The initial target selected for Byzantine operations revealed Belisarius's profound understanding that psychological impact could prove as valuable as military success in undermining Ostrogothic resistance throughout Italian territories. Sicily's strategic position controlling access to the central Mediterranean made it an obvious objective, but the island's predominantly Greek population and its historical connections to Byzantine culture suggested that conquest might be achieved with minimal resistance, while providing a secure base for subsequent operations against the Italian mainland. The rapid capitulation of Sicilian strongholds during the summer of 535 AD confirmed these calculations, as local populations welcomed Byzantine forces as liberators rather than conquerors, while Gothic garrisons found themselves isolated and outnumbered without hope of reinforcement from the mainland. The siege of Syracuse demonstrated the tactical sophistication that Belisarius had developed through his African campaigns, as Byzantine forces employed coordinated land and sea attacks that prevented effective Gothic resistance while minimizing damage to urban infrastructure that would prove valuable for subsequent administrative purposes and economic recovery. The city's massive fortifications, constructed during the classical period and reinforced by successive rulers over centuries, required systematic reduction using siege engines that combined traditional Roman engineering excellence with innovations learned through warfare against Persian and barbarian opponents across multiple theatres of operation. Gothic defenders commanded by experienced officers who understood the strategic importance of maintaining control over Sicily's largest port mounted determined resistance that tested Byzantine capabilities, while providing valuable intelligence about enemy tactical methods and equipment standards for future operations. The fall of Syracuse after a siege of barely 3 weeks revealed the devastating extent to which Gothic defensive preparations had been compromised by the political instabilities that followed. Amalasuntha's assassination and the subsequent leadership crisis that paralyzed effective military coordination. The garrison's surrender negotiations, conducted through intermediaries who emphasized the futility of continued resistance against overwhelming Byzantine superiority, reflected broader demoralization within Gothic military ranks as news of defeat spread rapidly throughout territories under increasingly fragile Ostrogothic control. The generous terms offered to surrendering defenders, including safe passage to the mainland and retention of personal property, demonstrated Belisarius's sophisticated understanding of psychological warfare methods that could encourage similar capitulations at other defensive positions without costly siege operations. The conquest of southern Italy proceeded with remarkable speed, as Byzantine forces expertly exploited the advantages gained through their Sicilian success, while Gothic defensive arrangements collapsed under the relentless pressure of coordinated attacks supported by local populations who viewed imperial restoration as preferable to continued barbarian rule that had become increasingly oppressive and ineffective. The strategic port cities of Reggio and Brindisi surrendered without serious resistance, as their predominantly Greek inhabitants opened their gates to Byzantine forces, providing secure bases for further operations while demonstrating the devastating extent to which ethnic and religious divisions within Italian society could be exploited by skilled military commanders who understood local conditions and population sympathies. The capture of these strategic positions effectively severed communications between Gothic forces in different regions, while providing Belisarius with multiple options for subsequent campaigns that could strike at the heart of Ostrogothic power throughout the peninsula. The advance toward Naples brought Byzantine forces into contact with more substantial Gothic resistance, as Theodahad's government finally recognized that the loss of this crucial port would threaten the entire kingdom's defensive strategy and territorial integrity. The city's commanding position controlling access to the Tyrrhenian Sea made it an essential link in the supply chains that sustained Gothic military operations throughout central Italy, while its formidable fortifications and experienced garrison, commanded by Conton, presented the first serious test of Byzantine siege capabilities since the African campaigns. The Gothic commander's decision to defend Naples reflected both strategic necessity and personal honor, as surrender would have exposed the entire western coast to Byzantine naval operations while destroying his own reputation among warrior followers who expected courageous resistance regardless of tactical circumstances or overwhelming odds. The siege of Naples, beginning in November 536 AD, revealed the methodical approach characterizing Belisarius's military operations as Byzantine engineers systematically reduced the city's defensive capabilities while maintaining relentless pressure that prevented effective relief operations from Gothic forces elsewhere in Italy. The investment of the city required complex coordination between land forces that controlled overland approaches and naval units that blockaded the harbour, creating comprehensive isolation that gradually exhausted the defenders' resources while preventing communication with potential reinforcements that might have broken the siege. Gothic attempts to break the siege through desperate sorties against Byzantine siege works demonstrated determined resistance, but lacked the coordination and tactical sophistication necessary to achieve decisive results against disciplined imperial troops who had extensive experience in siege warfare from their African campaigns. The innovative siege techniques employed by Byzantine engineers during the Naples operations demonstrated the technological advantages that imperial forces possessed over their Gothic opponents through superior engineering capabilities and specialized equipment. The construction of underground tunnels that approached the city's walls from concealed positions required engineering skills that few contemporary armies could match, while the deployment of torsion artillery, capable of breaching massive stone fortifications, provided firepower that Gothic defenders could not effectively counter with their limited resources. These technological disparities reflected broader differences in military organization and resource allocation, as the Byzantine Empire's centralized administrative systems could concentrate specialized capabilities that individual barbarian kingdoms could not replicate, despite their warrior traditions and military experience. The capture of Naples on December 536 AD through a coordinated assault that brilliantly combined tunnel operations with direct attacks against weakened wall sections demonstrated the devastating effectiveness of Byzantine combined arms tactics, while providing crucial psychological advantages that would influence subsequent operations throughout the campaign. The city's fall after a siege of barely 6 weeks shocked Gothic military commanders who had expected much longer resistance from such a strongly fortified position, while the generous treatment accorded to the civilian population encouraged other Italian cities to consider surrender rather than face similar siege operations that seemed impossible to resist. The speed of the victory also provided Belisarius with additional time to prepare for more challenging operations against targets that would be more heavily defended and strategically important for controlling the Italian peninsula. The march on Rome represented the culmination of Belisarius's initial campaign strategy, as control of the ancient capital would provide both symbolic legitimacy and practical advantages for subsequent operations throughout the Italian peninsula. The city's massive population of approximately 100,000 inhabitants and its complex urban geography presented unique challenges for both attackers and defenders, while its historical significance ensured that the battle for Rome would be closely observed by audiences throughout the Mediterranean world. Gothic preparations for defending the city reflect a Theodahad's recognition that the loss of Rome would effectively end any credible claims to legitimate authority over Italian territories and spell the doom of the Ostrogothic kingdom. The Gothic evacuation of Rome on December 9th, 536 AD following Theodahad's deposition and replacement, by Witiges demonstrated the extent to which political instabilities had undermined effective military resistance to Byzantine advances. The new Gothic king's decision to withdraw his forces to more defensible positions around Ravenna reflected sound strategic thinking, as Rome's extensive urban area could not be effectively defended by the limited troops available, while the city's enormous supply requirements would strain Gothic logistical capabilities beyond their breaking point. The ancient capital of the Western Roman Empire had fallen to Byzantine forces without a battle, marking the beginning of the end for the Ostrogothic kingdom that had once seemed destined to rule Italy forever. The dream of Theodoric the Great had become a nightmare of defeat and dissolution, as the greatest barbarian kingdom in post-Roman Europe crumbled under the weight of internal division and external pressure that its founders could never have imagined. Nevertheless, the evacuation of the Eternal City without a significant confrontation constituted a devastating morale blow that stimulated additional desertions from the Ostrogothic movement, while granting Belisarius a celebrated triumph that elevated his standing across the empire. The ceremonial entrance of Byzantine armies into Rome symbolized the restoration of imperial dominion over lands that had remained under barbarian sovereignty for more than 6 decades. Belisarius's magnificent parade through the historic avenues, flanked by his seasoned soldiers bearing the banners that had conquered Africa and Sicily, offered compelling visual proof of imperial revival while showing Roman citizens that genuine security existed under Byzantine governance. The commander's diplomatic approach toward Catholic ecclesiastical leaders and his prompt focus on municipal food distribution created positive impressions that eased the transition from Gothic to imperial rule throughout the ancient capital. The protective measures that Witiges established around Ravenna throughout the winter of 537 AD reflected his comprehension that Ostrogothic continuation required establishing strategic buffer zones that could withstand Byzantine penetration while creating opportunities for diplomatic maneuvers that might transform the military equation. The new monarch's comprehensive strengthening of positions across the Po Valley established numerous defensive barriers that would compel Belisarius to undertake prolonged siege campaigns, while Gothic armies maintained tactical flexibility and territorial familiarity. These arrangements revealed sophisticated strategic planning that utilized generations of Italian warfare experience, while modifying traditional Germanic defensive principles to match the particular geographic circumstances of northern Italian terrain. The blockade of Rome, commencing in March 537 AD, constituted Witiges' most daring effort to overturn Byzantine victories through concentrated military pressure that would showcase Gothic determination, while potentially attracting assistance from foreign confederates. The Ostrogothic host that surrounded the ancient metropolis totaled roughly 50,000 fighters assembled from across the kingdom's domains, constituting the most substantial military expedition that any barbarian leader had organized for campaigns against imperial forces. The blockade's length and ferocity would evaluate both armies' stamina while delivering conclusive proof regarding the comparative strengths of Gothic and Byzantine warfare methodologies. The Ostrogothic siege constructions erected around Rome revealed engineering proficiency that matched contemporary Byzantine excellence, while exposing how completely barbarian forces had incorporated Roman military innovations into their operational requirements. The 7 reinforced encampments positioned at strategic locations around the city's circumference established total encirclement that blocked primary highways while offering protected headquarters for prolonged military activities. Each installation featured wooden barriers strengthened with soil excavations and supplied with artillery emplacements that could disrupt Byzantine provision columns while shielding Gothic troops from raids launched from the municipal ramparts. The offensive against the Salarian entrance on March 21st, 537 AD, represented the most aggressive phase of the Ostrogothic blockade, as Vitiges concentrated his warriors against what seemed the most vulnerable portion of Rome's protective boundary. The synchronized assault utilized siege platforms, wall-breaching devices, and massed bowfire, attempting to establish openings that could be penetrated by large infantry charges, while Gothic mounted units positioned themselves to prevent any Byzantine rescue operations. The extended combat tested both armies' tactical abilities while providing definitive evidence about the efficiency of various military technologies and organizational approaches. The collapse of the Ostrogothic offensive exposed fundamental flaws in barbarian siege methodology, while proving the enduring value of Roman defensive engineering when correctly applied. Byzantine guards commanded by veterans experienced in siege combat from African expeditions employed coordinated artillery bombardment and organized infantry responses that prevented Gothic warriors from securing lasting positions on the city's battlements. The setback compelled Vitiges to reconsider his strategic methodology while offering Belisarius chances to initiate aggressive campaigns that could capitalize on Gothic discouragement and tactical disorder. The extended blockade of Rome gradually transformed into an endurance contest that examined both Gothic persistence and Byzantine ingenuity as the struggle extended through the sweltering summer seasons of 537 AD into the subsequent winter period. Vitiges had converted his initial assault approach into a methodical encirclement intended to force the city's capitulation through starvation, while his technicians built increasingly advanced siege machinery that showcased the military expertise Gothic armies had gained through decades of conflict against imperial adversaries. The enormous wooden towers that emerged outside Rome's perimeter incorporated improvements derived from Roman military texts, containing numerous artillery decks and shielded passages that enabled Gothic bowmen to sustain covering fire against Byzantine defenders, while siege mechanisms systematically compromised the ancient fortifications. Byzantine responses demonstrated Belisarius's tactical adaptability as he modified his restricted forces to confront dangers that substantially exceeded his available manpower. The commander's choice to execute coordinated attacks against Gothic siege installations proved his recognition that defensive strategies would eventually surrender to the crushing numerical advantage that Vitiges had gathered around the metropolis. These meticulously organized operations, usually conducted during pre-dawn periods when Gothic sentinels were most vulnerable, deployed compact groups of extensively equipped infantry accompanied by mounted bowmen whose agility permitted swift evacuation before enemy reinforcements could react efficiently. The psychological consequences of these missions proved as significant as their tactical achievements, as continuous successful raids damaged Gothic morale, while proving to Roman civilians that their Byzantine guardians possessed both the ability and resolve to sustain active opposition against overwhelming odds. The provision circumstances within besieged Rome generated intricate logistical difficulties that demanded creative responses combining military knowledge with civilian collaboration. Belisarius had inherited a metropolis whose standard food deliveries relied on consistent shipments from throughout the Italian territories, yet the Gothic encirclement had eliminated most overland transport networks, while maritime activities remained constrained by the limited Byzantine naval presence available for Italian campaigns. The commander's solution involved establishing rationing protocols that prioritized military personnel while preserving civilian spirits through fair allocation of existing resources. Subterranean storage chambers built during the imperial era offered secure depositories for accumulated provisions, while methodical inventory control guaranteed effective utilization of limited supplies during the protracted siege duration. The appearance of reinforcements under John the Cappadocian in late 537 AD signified a decisive moment in the blockade, as additional Byzantine soldiers provided Belisarius with offensive potential that had been unattainable with his original insufficient forces. The fresh contingent included 600 horsemen selected from imperial guard formations, whose equipment and preparation represented the supreme standards of contemporary military excellence, while their leader contributed extensive knowledge from Persian border expeditions, where mobile combat tactics had proven victorious against numerically superior enemies. The incorporation of these new troops into existing defensive structures required careful planning to maximize their effectiveness, while maintaining the established siege operation patterns that had successfully frustrated Gothic assault efforts. John's cavalry strikes against Gothic provision networks proved the susceptibility of Vitiges' extensive blockade positions to attacks by disciplined mobile forces operating from secure urban bases. These missions, conducted with the systematic precision characterizing elite imperial formations, targeted the transport convoys and livestock supplies that sustained the massive Gothic army, while avoiding direct engagement with primary enemy concentrations that could overwhelm the relatively small raiding parties. The accumulated impact of these operations gradually weakened Gothic logistical systems, while forcing Vitiges to redirect substantial warrior numbers from siege activities to defend his increasingly exposed supply networks. The building of the Milvian Bridge, stronghold by Gothic technicians, constituted their most ambitious project to establish permanent siege infrastructure that could maintain the encirclement indefinitely while providing secure locations for continued military operations. This extensive earthwork complex, positioned to dominate the crucial river crossing, incorporated multiple defensive barriers with integrated artillery positions and underground storage areas that could support a significant garrison through extended periods. The technical skill required for this construction endeavor proved the sophisticated military capabilities that Gothic armies had achieved through their remarkable transformation from simple tribal raiders into the builders of Europe's greatest barbarian kingdom, even as that kingdom faced its final desperate struggle for survival against the resurgent power of Rome. Yet even as they built these impressive fortifications, the Ostrogoths could sense that their golden age was ending, that the dream of Theodoric the Great was crumbling under the relentless pressure of Byzantine determination and their own internal divisions that had fatally weakened the unity essential for survival in an increasingly hostile world. Nevertheless, the undertaking's magnitude demonstrated Vitiges' unwavering resolve to secure conclusive triumph, irrespective of the duration and assets necessary for completion. Imperial attempts to sabotage the crossing's stronghold resulted in some of the most vicious combat throughout the entire blockade period. Recognizing the Ostrogothic dominance of the tactical location would permanently isolate Rome from conceivable rescue armies, Belisarius authorized numerous nocturnal strikes against the construction activities, utilizing elite combat specialists equipped with fire-starting materials and demolition gear, specifically designed to eliminate enemy engineering ventures before their completion. These perilous missions demanded extraordinary synchronization and precision, as assault teams had to advance toward extensively defended installations across exposed ground, while transporting cumbersome apparatus that restricted their maneuverability and heightened their susceptibility to Ostrogothic projectile weaponry. The confrontation for the Milvian crossing on December 17, 537 AD, constituted the decisive battle of the blockade, as both military forces deployed considerable resources in a clash that would establish the strategic equilibrium for future campaigns. Ostrogothic guards, directed by seasoned commanders who comprehended the installation's vital significance, had organized comprehensive protective measures, incorporating hidden bowman locations, portable obstacles that could direct assaulting troops into pre-selected elimination areas, and backup units positioned to execute counterstrikes against any Imperial penetration efforts. The stronghold's blueprint incorporated knowledge gained from earlier siege combat while modifying traditional Germanic protective principles to the particular topographical characteristics of the Tiber passage. Belisarius' offensive strategy revealed the tactical expertise that had distinguished his most triumphant missions, merging deceptive assaults against secondary targets with concentrated power applied at meticulously chosen breakthrough locations. The principal attack contingent, consisting of his most veteran soldiers, supported by John's mounted formations, approached the crossing defenses during nightfall, while secondary troops generated disturbance and disorder at remote positions to conceal the main assault's movement. The synchronization demanded for this intricate maneuver tested Imperial command abilities while exposing how extensively Byzantine military philosophy had advanced to incorporate teachings derived from combat against varied adversaries across the Empire's broad boundaries. The Ostrogothic opposition to the Imperial offensive exposed both the capabilities and restrictions of barbarian military structure, When confronting organized imperial armies utilizing coordinated tactical approaches, individual Gothic fighters proved the personal bravery and battle expertise that had facilitated their forefathers' Italian conquest, struggling with ancestral lengthy blades and wide-headed lances that could deliver catastrophic damage in hand-to-hand encounters. Nevertheless, the absence of methodical cooperation between various formations and the lack of uniform command protocols generated weaknesses that skilled imperial officers could manipulate through exact timing and focused force application at crucial instances. The penetration accomplished by John's horsemen at the crossing's northern entrance proved the decisive influence that superior tactical agility could accomplish against stationary defensive installations. The mounted bowmen's capacity to deliver covering fire while sustaining movement enabled them to eliminate Ostrogothic archery emplacements that had been constructed to oppose infantry charges, while their swift progression prevented enemy reinforcements from establishing effective responses. The psychological impact of witnessing their most powerful defensive position breached by a comparatively minor force contributed to the breakdown of Ostrogothic resistance as individual warriors commenced deserting their locations, rather than confronting encirclement by rapidly advancing imperial armies. The consequences of the Milvian crossing triumph provided Belisarius with strategic benefits that transcended the immediate tactical achievement, as reports of the defeat circulated throughout Ostrogothic domains and stimulated defections from Vitige's movement. The seizure of the crossing installation established direct communication pathways between Rome and imperial forces operating throughout other Italian regions, while the considerable quantities of equipment and provisions abandoned by withdrawing Ostrogothic troops provided valuable assets for subsequent campaigns. More significantly, the conspicuous proof of imperial military dominance damaged Ostrogothic morale across the kingdom while encouraging Italian communities to perceive imperial restoration as certain rather than simply conceivable. The progressive deterioration of the Ostrogothic blockade throughout the initial months of 538 AD reflected the accumulated consequences of military reversals, supply deficiencies, and diminishing spirits that had systematically compromised Vitige's standing. Individual Ostrogothic leaders began arranging separate agreements with imperial forces rather than maintaining futile resistance, while complete military formations deserted their blockade positions to return to their native regions, where local security matters assumed priority over kingdom-wide strategic goals. The methodical breakdown of Ostrogothic military order proved how extensively barbarian armies relied on persistent success to preserve unit solidarity and command legitimacy. Vitige's choice to terminate the blockade and retreat to Ravenna in March 538 AD signified the practical conclusion of Ostrogothic aggressive potential against imperial armies, while beginning a fresh stage of the conflict, distinguished by protective campaigns from reinforced installations across northern Italy. The Ostrogothic monarch's withdrawal, executed with remarkable ability despite his force's demoralized state, preserved significant military resources while establishing protective positions that could conceivably maintain extended resistance. The evacuation pathway through the Apennine Ranges provided natural barriers that restricted imperial pursuit, while enabling Ostrogothic armies to preserve organizational coherence despite their recent setbacks. The emancipation of Rome following a blockade, enduring over 12 months, provided Belisarius with both symbolic triumph and practical benefits for subsequent military campaigns across the Italian territories. The commander's victory commemoration, performed with suitable ceremony, yet avoiding extreme exhibitions that might estrange Italian communities, proved imperial regard for Roman customs while announcing imperial dominance over lands that had remained under barbarian authority for generations. The restoration of standard urban existence, encompassing the renewal of commercial operations and religious practices, established favorable circumstances for imperial administration while offering proof of imperial dedication to Italian prosperity. The strategic circumstances that developed after the blockade's conclusion exposed both the scope of imperial accomplishments and the obstacles that persisted for complete conquest of the Ostrogothic realm. Imperial armies now dominated most of central and southern Italy, including the symbolically essential metropolis of Rome, while preserving secure communication networks with Constantinople through maritime activities in the Adriatic waters. However, Ostrogothic opposition remained considerable in northern domains, where Vitiges had established protective installations that could potentially sustain prolonged conflict, while the restricted scale of imperial forces available for Italian campaigns created limitations on the velocity with which final triumph could be accomplished. The administrative structures that Belisarius established in conquered regions proved his comprehension that military achievement required effective civilian leadership to accomplish enduring political authority. The restoration of traditional Roman legal systems and revenue collection mechanisms provided familiar structures for Italian communities while guaranteeing sufficient income sources to support ongoing military activities. Imperial administrators, numerous having acquired knowledge in the recently conquered African territories, modified imperial bureaucratic approaches to Italian circumstances while honoring local traditions and rites that had emerged during the Ostrogothic era. The enlistment of Italian personnel for both military and administrative roles reflected imperial acknowledgement that permanent dominance required local partnership and involvement rather than simple occupation by external armies. Roman aristocrats who had served under Ostrogothic authority received chances to continue their professions under imperial leadership, while urban communities were urged to resume standard commercial and professional pursuits that had been interrupted by extended warfare. These strategies established stakeholder communities whose interests corresponded with continued imperial authority while supplying practical knowledge that imperial administrators could not have provided independently. The reinforcement of essential strategic locations throughout imperial-controlled territory exposed Belisarius's recognition that Ostrogothic counteroffensives remained feasible despite recent reversals. The methodical strengthening of protective installations at Rome, Naples, and other significant cities provided secure headquarters for imperial armies while establishing barriers that would complicate any future Ostrogothic aggressive campaigns. These engineering undertakings utilized both Roman building methods and improvements developed through recent siege combat knowledge, establishing protective networks that incorporated teachings derived from the prolonged struggle while adapting to the particular geographical and tactical circumstances of Italian warfare. The appearance of Totila as a prominent Ostrogothic military commander during this era constituted a fresh phase in barbarian opposition that would examine imperial consolidation attempts throughout the peninsula. Unlike the earlier generation of Ostrogothic leaders who had depended primarily on traditional Germanic combat approaches, Totila proved tactical adaptability and strategic perception that incorporated lessons derived from recent defeats while exploiting the weaknesses that extended imperial supply networks created. His capacity to establish effective resistance from restricted resources while preserving Ostrogothic morale despite previous failures would prove essential for the kingdom's continuation during the difficult years approaching. The guerrilla combat methods that distinguished Ostrogothic operations under Totila's command constituted a substantial development from the conventional military approaches that had dominated earlier conflict phases. The once mighty Ostrogothic kingdom that had ruled Italy for over 30 years was entering its final agony, its dreams of permanence shattered by internal discord and external pressure that would ultimately prove insurmountable for even the most determined barbarian resistance. The revenue-gathering mechanisms, legal frameworks, and ambassadorial customs that had functioned effectively throughout Ostrogothic Italy became subjects of intense study and modification by later monarchs who acknowledged their remarkable success in administering heterogeneous populations while preserving political equilibrium across diverse communities. The cultural amalgamation accomplished under Germanic leadership established scholarly traditions that fundamentally shaped the evolution of medieval European education and creative expression throughout the continent. The safeguarding of ancient manuscripts through Ostrogothic sponsorship guaranteed that vital works of literature, philosophy, and technical expertise survived the political catastrophes that eliminated numerous other repositories of classical wisdom accumulated over centuries. The scriptoriums founded at establishments like Cassiodorus's vivarium maintained operations long beyond the collapse of the Germanic realm, their reproduction facilities generating manuscripts that conveyed classical knowledge to medieval academics across Europe. The instructional approaches developed throughout Gothic Italy, which merged traditional Roman pedagogical systems with practical preparation in governmental management, supplied blueprints for medieval academies that required preparing students for professions in increasingly sophisticated political environments demanding comprehensive expertise. The architectural breakthroughs that materialized during the Gothic era established design concepts and building methods that shaped European construction traditions for generations. The combination of Germanic ornamental tastes with Roman engineering abilities produced distinctive creative movements that manifested in religious buildings, royal residences, and municipal structures throughout medieval Europe. The Mausoleum of Theodoric in Ravenna, featuring its exceptional fusion of classical dimensions and barbarian symbolic components, inspired comparable projects in other realms where rulers attempted to declare their authority through monumental architecture that honored both Germanic heritage and Roman imperial precedents, established over centuries of cultural development. The building methods developed for these undertakings, encompassing innovations in stone carving, metalworking, and ornamental crafts, were disseminated through craftsmen who transported their abilities to fresh locations as political situations transformed across the European landscape. The theological policies that had sustained stability throughout Gothic Italy offered precedents for managing doctrinal diversity within medieval European kingdoms, containing multiple Christian communities with varying theological commitments and religious practices. The principle of spiritual tolerance that Theodoric had established, permitting both Arian and Catholic Christians to observe their respective convictions without governmental interference, provided practical solutions to challenges that would confront countless medieval rulers managing religious minorities. The careful equilibrium between royal power and ecclesiastical autonomy that had distinguished Gothic-Catholic relations shaped the development of church-state relationships throughout medieval Europe, particularly in kingdoms where monarchs needed to maintain cooperation with religious communities possessing different theological obligations and spiritual traditions. The diplomatic approaches that Gothic rulers had utilized in managing relationships with other barbarian kingdoms established precedents for international relations that continued influencing European politics long after the kingdom's dissolution. The marriage alliance networks that had connected the Ostrogothic royal house with Frankish, Burgundian, Vandal, and Visigothic dynasties created kinship systems that transcended ethnic boundaries while providing mechanisms for resolving conflicts through negotiation rather than warfare. These diplomatic traditions influenced the development of medieval European international law, particularly the concepts of dynastic legitimacy and territorial sovereignty that would govern relationships between emerging nation-states across the continent for centuries to come. The military innovations that had characterized Gothic armies, particularly their integration of traditional Germanic warrior traditions with Roman tactical methods and steppe warfare techniques learned during the Hunnic period, influenced the development of medieval European military organization throughout subsequent generations. The combined arms formations that Gothic commanders had perfected, employing heavy cavalry, disciplined infantry, and mobile archery units in coordinated battlefield operations, provided models for medieval armies that needed to adapt to changing tactical environments and evolving warfare technologies. The siege warfare techniques that Gothic engineers had developed, combining traditional Roman engineering methods with innovations learned through extended campaigns, contributed to the evolution of medieval military technology and strategic thinking across Europe. The economic systems that had flourished under Gothic rule, particularly the commercial networks that had connected Italian production centers with markets throughout the Mediterranean basin, established trade relationships that continued influencing European economic development after the kingdom's political collapse and territorial fragmentation. The standardization of weights, measures, and monetary systems that Gothic administrators had implemented provided frameworks for commercial exchanges that facilitated long-distance trade even during periods of political instability and governmental transition. The agricultural improvements that had been introduced in Gothic territories, including new cultivation techniques and crop varieties, contributed to the gradual recovery of European agricultural productivity that would support population growth during the medieval period. The intellectual achievements of scholars like Boethius and Cassiodorus, supported by Gothic royal patronage, created philosophical and theological frameworks that profoundly influenced medieval European thought for generations. Boethius's translations of Aristotelian logical works provided medieval scholars with their primary access to Greek philosophical methods, while his synthesis of classical reasoning with Christian doctrine established intellectual approaches that dominated European universities for centuries. His Consolation of Philosophy, written during his imprisonment before execution, became one of the most widely read works in medieval Europe, its exploration of divine providence and human free will influencing generations of theologians and philosophers throughout the continent. Cassiodorus's educational theories and institutional innovations provided blueprints for medieval European schools and universities that needed to preserve classical learning while adapting it to Christian educational goals and spiritual objectives. His systematic approach to manuscript preservation and copying established methods that ensured the survival of essential classical texts through the political upheavals of the early medieval period. The library classification system he developed influenced the organization of medieval European book collections, while his integration of secular and religious learning created educational curricula that balanced practical training with theoretical knowledge essential for comprehensive education. The historical narratives produced by Gothic and Roman authors during the kingdom's existence provided medieval European chroniclers with models for writing about barbarian peoples and their relationships with classical civilization throughout the transformation period. Jordanes' Getica, based largely on Cassiodorus's lost Gothic history, established historiographical traditions that influenced medieval European understanding of Germanic peoples and their role in the transformation of the Roman world into medieval European civilization. These works created interpretive frameworks that portrayed barbarian kingdoms as legitimate successors to Roman imperial authority rather than simply destructive forces, contributing to medieval European concepts of political continuity and dynastic legitimacy that would shape European political thought for centuries. The archaeological evidence preserved from Gothic sites continues providing insights into the material culture and daily life of early medieval European societies across the continent. The distinctive artistic styles that emerge from the fusion of Germanic, Roman, and Byzantine influences can be traced in artifact assemblages throughout medieval Europe, demonstrating the widespread influence of cultural patterns that had originated in Gothic Italy. The technological innovations preserved in Gothic metalwork, jewelry, and decorative arts influenced European craftsmanship for centuries, their techniques transmitted through artisan networks that connected different regions of the continent and maintained cultural continuity across political boundaries. Modern historiographical debates about the nature of the Ostrogothic kingdom and its place in European development reflect broader scholarly discussions about the transformation of the Roman world and the emergence of medieval European civilization from classical foundations. The traditional narrative that portrayed barbarian invasions as destructive forces that ended classical civilization has been largely replaced by more nuanced interpretations that emphasize cultural continuity and creative synthesis between different traditions. Scholars like Patrick Geary and Walter Pohl have demonstrated that barbarian kingdoms like the Ostrogothic realm represented innovative attempts to create new forms of political organization that could govern ethnically diverse populations while preserving essential elements of classical culture and administrative expertise. The question of Ostrogothic ethnic identity has become particularly important in contemporary scholarly discussions about the nature of early medieval European societies and their cultural development. Rather than viewing the Ostrogoths as a distinct tribal group with fixed cultural characteristics, modern historians increasingly understand Gothic identity as a fluid political and cultural construct that could incorporate diverse populations under unified leadership and shared governmental systems. This understanding of identity as constructed rather than inherent has profound implications for our comprehension of how medieval European societies developed their distinctive characteristics, while maintaining connections to both barbarian traditions and classical heritage. The Ostrogothic kingdom, though ultimately unsuccessful in maintaining its independence against Byzantine reconquest, had demonstrated that barbarian peoples could create sophisticated governmental systems that successfully balanced competing cultural traditions while achieving remarkable levels of prosperity, stability, and cultural achievement that would influence European development for centuries to come. Their legacy endures not in political continuity, but in the countless ways their innovations, institutions, and cultural syntheses shaped the medieval European world that emerged from the ruins of classical antiquity. The fiscal administration frameworks, legal mechanisms, and ambassadorial practices that had flourished remarkably throughout Ostrogothic territories became essential study subjects for future sovereigns who appreciated their exceptional capability in managing multicultural societies while sustaining governmental harmony across varied ethnic groups. The intellectual fusion accomplished under Germanic governance established academic movements that fundamentally transformed medieval European scholarship and creative development across the continent. The protection of ancient writings through Ostrogothic financial support ensured that crucial literary works, philosophical treatises, and technical documentation survived political catastrophes that obliterated countless other archives of classical wisdom accumulated over generations. The manuscript centers founded at facilities like Cassiodorus's vivarium maintained functionality well beyond the Germanic kingdom's destruction, their reproduction workshops creating documents that delivered classical expertise to medieval intellectuals throughout European territories. The teaching methodologies cultivated in Ostrogothic regions, which blended conventional Roman instructional techniques with hands-on preparation in administrative governance, offered blueprints for medieval academies requiring student preparation for positions in progressively sophisticated political structures, demanding comprehensive knowledge and specialized skills. The building breakthroughs that materialized throughout the Ostrogothic era established architectural principles and construction methodologies that shaped European structural traditions across centuries of development. The combination of Germanic ornamental inclinations with Roman structural expertise produced unique creative expressions that emerged in religious edifices, governmental complexes, and civic constructions throughout medieval European landscapes. The sepulchre of Theodoric in Ravenna, displaying its extraordinary blend of classical measurements and barbarian representational features, motivated comparable endeavors in alternative realms where monarchs aimed to announce their authority through magnificent architecture, honoring both Germanic heritage and Roman imperial traditions established through centuries of cultural evolution. The building procedures developed for these ventures, incorporating advances in stone craftsmanship, metallic fabrication, and ornamental techniques, were distributed through skilled workers who transported their expertise to different territories as political conditions evolved across European regions. The spiritual strategies that had preserved equilibrium throughout Ostrogothic domains offered models for addressing doctrinal variation within medieval European realms, containing numerous Christian groups with contrasting theological positions and worship practices. The concept of religious acceptance that Theodoric had established, enabling both Arian and Catholic believers to follow their individual faiths without state intervention, provided workable answers to difficulties that would challenge countless medieval leaders managing minority religious communities. The precise balance between monarchical power and clerical autonomy that had defined Ostrogothic Catholic interactions shaped the evolution of church-state connections throughout medieval Europe, especially in kingdoms where rulers required maintaining collaboration with religious organizations possessing different theological duties and spiritual customs. The diplomatic strategies that Ostrogothic monarchs had utilized in handling relationships with alternative barbarian kingdoms created models for international interactions that continued affecting European politics long beyond the realm's dissolution. The matrimonial partnership structures that had connected the Ostrogothic royal family with Frankish, Burgundian, Vandal, and Visigothic ruling houses established family systems transcending ethnic divisions, while offering methods for settling disputes through discussion rather than combat. These diplomatic customs influenced the formation of medieval European international legislation, particularly the principles of hereditary legitimacy and territorial authority, that would regulate connections between developing nation-states across the continent for generations ahead. The military advances that had distinguished Ostrogothic forces, especially their incorporation of traditional Germanic warrior customs with Roman strategic approaches and steppe combat methods acquired during the Hunnic era, affected the formation of medieval European military structure throughout subsequent periods. The integrated weapon formations that Ostrogothic commanders had mastered, utilizing heavy horsemen, organized foot soldiers, and flexible archery formations in coordinated battlefield activities, supplied examples for medieval forces requiring adaptation to evolving tactical circumstances and advancing warfare technologies. The siege combat methods that Ostrogothic engineers had created, combining traditional Roman structural techniques with innovations gained through prolonged expeditions, contributed to the advancement of medieval military technology and strategic thinking across European territories. The commercial structures that had prospered under Ostrogothic governance, particularly the trade connections that had linked Italian manufacturing centres with marketplaces throughout the Mediterranean region, established business relationships that continued influencing European economic progress after the kingdom's political breakdown and territorial division. The uniformization of measurements, standards, and currency structures that Ostrogothic officials had implemented supplied frameworks for commercial transactions that supported long-range trade even during eras of political uncertainty and governmental changes. The farming enhancements that had been implemented in Ostrogothic regions, including fresh cultivation methods and crop types, contributed to the steady restoration of European agricultural output that would sustain population expansion during the medieval era. The scholarly accomplishments of intellectuals like Boethius and Cassiodorus, backed by Ostrogothic royal sponsorship, established philosophical and theological structures that deeply influenced medieval European thinking for generations. Boethius's interpretations of Aristotelian logical writings supplied medieval academics with their fundamental access to Greek philosophical approaches, while his combination of classical reasoning with Christian teaching created intellectual methods that controlled European educational institutions for centuries. His Consolation of Philosophy, composed during his confinement before execution, became among the most extensively studied works in medieval Europe, its examination of divine providence and human free will affecting generations of theologians and philosophers throughout the continent. Cassiodorus's educational concepts and institutional breakthroughs supplied designs for medieval European schools and universities, requiring preservation of classical learning while modifying it to Christian educational objectives and spiritual purposes. His methodical approach to manuscript protection and reproduction established techniques that guaranteed the continuation of vital classical writings through the political disturbances of the early medieval period. The library organization system he created influenced the arrangement of medieval European book collections, while his combination of secular and religious education established educational programs that balanced practical instruction with theoretical understanding, essential for comprehensive learning. The historical accounts produced by Ostrogothic and Roman writers during the kingdom's existence supplied medieval European chroniclers with examples for documenting barbarian peoples and their connections with classical civilization throughout the transformation period. Jordanes's Getica, founded largely on Cassiodorus's lost Ostrogothic chronicle, established historical traditions that influenced medieval European comprehension of Germanic peoples and their function in transforming the Roman world into medieval European civilization. These writings established interpretive structures that presented barbarian kingdoms as rightful inheritors of Roman imperial power rather than merely destructive elements, contributing to medieval European ideas of political continuity and hereditary legitimacy that would shape European political thought for centuries. The archaeological proof preserved from Ostrogothic locations continues supplying understanding into the material culture and everyday existence of early medieval European societies across the continent. The unique artistic movements that developed from the combination of Germanic, Roman, and Byzantine influences can be identified in artifact collections throughout medieval Europe, proving the extensive influence of cultural designs that had originated in Ostrogothic territories. The technological breakthroughs preserved in Ostrogothic metalwork, ornaments, and decorative crafts influenced European artisanship for centuries, their methods transmitted through craftsman networks that connected different continental regions and maintained cultural continuity across political boundaries. Contemporary historical discussions about the character of the Ostrogothic kingdom and its position in European development reflect wider scholarly conversations about the transformation of the Roman world and the emergence of medieval European civilization from classical foundations. The conventional account that described barbarian invasions as destructive powers that terminated classical civilization has been extensively replaced by more sophisticated interpretations, emphasizing cultural continuity and creative combination between different traditions. Academics like Patrick Geary and Walter Pole have proven that barbarian kingdoms like the Ostrogothic domain represented innovative efforts to establish fresh forms of political organization that could govern ethnically diverse populations while maintaining vital elements of classical culture, administrative knowledge. The matter of Ostrogothic ethnic identity has become especially significant in contemporary scholarly discussions about the character of early medieval European societies and their cultural development. Rather than considering the Ostrogoths as a separate tribal group with unchanging cultural features, modern historians progressively understand Gothic identity as a flexible political and cultural framework that could include diverse populations under unified leadership and shared governmental systems. This comprehension of identity as constructed rather than inherent has profound implications for our understanding of how medieval European societies developed their distinctive characteristics, while maintaining connections to both barbarian traditions and classical heritage. The Ostrogothic kingdom, though ultimately unsuccessful in preserving its independence against Byzantine reconquest, had proven that barbarian peoples could establish sophisticated governmental systems, successfully balancing competing cultural traditions, while achieving remarkable levels of prosperity, stability, and cultural accomplishment that would influence European development for centuries ahead. Their heritage endures not in political continuity, but in the countless ways their innovations, institutions, and cultural combinations shaped the medieval European world that emerged from classical antiquity's remnants.